I think solitary reading is about as bad an addiction as solitary drinking. One should drink with others, and one should read with others as well. Because you don't really find out what you've done with your mind unless you and somebody else, your wife or somebody else, your friends, have read the same book and you and they discuss it. The role of discussion, of conversation about serious matters, books read, discussed seriously and well, is the most fruitful of all the forms by which one grows up and one hopes becomes educated. Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back to the Muqaddimah weekly reading in the Adab Book Club here. We are back to our Muqaddimah review effectively on a weekly basis. If you'd like to participate in a live session as we're doing right now, you can do so by joining the Adab Book Club via Telegram. The details are in the description box below, and you'll receive a direct invitation every week to participate on this forum. So today we're going to discuss a very interesting and what I consider personally as somebody who loves the Muqaddimah, who finds a great deal of insight and learning from this wonderful book. I consider this chapter the most powerful and the most interesting chapter in the entire book. Okay, personally. Now, others may have different perspectives, that's okay. But personally, this is the most powerful chapter in the entire Muqaddimah. And we're going to explain and explore why I believe that to be the case today, inshallah. So, Ibn Khaldun on natural law, or the innate law, or the innate essence of spiritual law, or law in general, in society. And he's going to give us his reason and rationale as to why he believes that man-made law, or laws and constructs created by men to regulate human beings, to regulate our interactions, to regulate how we behave in society, how these laws are not the best laws. Now, of course, before we begin, I need to make it very clear. Ibn Khaldun was a chief judge in Egypt. When I say law, natural law, and laws made by men, we're not talking about secular law here. We're not talking about a man who's advocating for democracy or other forms of legislation. He's talking about Islamic law, Sharia, fiqh. He's talking about these things. The laws that the Muslim societies were developing, codifying, and were passing as law. So we're within the realms of Islam here, okay? I don't want anyone to think that we're talking about man-made laws and shirk and tawaghit. No, we're talking about the laws and customs that Muslims were practicing in Muslim societies. Ibn Khaldun talks about that, but in general terms, you can say human laws. Okay, so let's make that very clear. We are not advocating, and when I speak later on in this presentation, I'm not advocating for secularism. I'm not calling for secularism. Alhamdulillah, I'm a Muslim. Ibn Khaldun was a chief judge, so he's not advocating for that. But if you can understand the essence of what he's saying, inshallah, you'll benefit a lot from this presentation. So, natural law. So, let me give you a bit of a preface. Natural law, as Ibn Khaldun will explain to us, is closer to, for example, the fitra of human beings. That human beings, as Muslims, we believe in our aqidah, and as part of our epistemology, the human being is pure by nature and is later corrupted. Okay, unlike other religions where you are corrupt and then you become saved, in Islam you are by nature pure and upright. Society corrupts you. Okay, so Ibn Khaldun is talking to us about the natural law, or the innate ability of man to regulate himself or herself and to act in an honorable way, okay, as opposed to the laws imposed on him or on her to behave themselves in society. Okay, so this is where we're talking from this perspective here. I want to begin by continuing the discussion we had in the Telegram group. And again, for those who have participated in that group chat earlier on today, for those who have seen the exchange, I want to make it very clear, it's never personal. This is not a personal issue here, but it is a very interesting set of discussions, actually. It's a very interesting set of discussions. And I have taken note that over the last couple of sessions, the issue of independence, making a living independently, and society and men and women in society, there is an underlying theme that's recurring every time in the discussions. And that is the role of women in society. Can women work? Can women be seen in public? Can women go to the masajid? The underlying factor here is about women in society. It's not about the work. It's not about the masjid per se. There is an underlying theme that is recurring, and it's about women in society and women being a fitna in society. And how do we control and curb the influence or the, you could say, the distraction of women in society? So I want to take that theme and utilize that theme as a template for what Ibn Khaldun mentions here. Is very powerful. Okay, so the theme of women, because if we don't address the theme and we address only the questions, we'll be here for another 10 years, finding new situations. Can women do this? Can they do that? Let's just get to the heart of the issue, the theme itself. The underlying theme, I'll tell you, is the issue of fitna. Okay, that a woman in society, if not for her own self, in general terms, will cause fitna for the men around, okay? There is the problem of if women are allowed or enabled to be in positions that are prominent in society, or just to be in the wider society, there is the issue of how do we control the fitna, okay? That is the underlying theme. So this will be a recurring theme in many different situations. It'll be in the masjid, it'll be at work, it'll be in the marketplace, and any other situation you can think of, the question will be the same question, the issue of women in society. So we want to get to the heart of this, and the issue, I believe, is not about the woman or the society. It's about the innate ability or inability for the members of society to control their own selves, regardless of the woman's role in society. It's about your own internal control mechanism, rather than the laws that will protect you from falling into, let's say, fitna, if a woman happens to walk past you. And this is really where Ibn Khaldun is going to explain to us some wonderful perspectives and also insights, really mind-blowing stuff. Okay, so are women allowed in the masjid? I will say, as I've said before, it's irrelevant. That question is irrelevant because every society, every place, every situation will be different. It depends on the customs of the land and the people in that land. That's quite irrelevant. But what we want to touch upon is the essence behind that question. Okay? And what does that mean for us? So Ibn Khaldun begins by telling us that sedentary people, our last episode we talked about sedentary lifestyle and how that can be detrimental for the individual and how they can acquire certain traits of laziness, of overdependency, of cowardice, right? As opposed to the person who's living in the Bedouin lifestyle in environments where they become self-reliant, courageous, people who go out into the elements. So Ibn Khaldun continues on that theme here, but now he's telling us about another element of sedentary lifestyle, and that is that they have laws in place, okay? So in the same way he mentions to us that they had walls in place to protect them, and there was a governor, and there was an army, and there were police officers to look after their safety, he's now telling us about the laws in place. Okay, so there are laws, legislation in place in society, sedentary society, that people depend upon for protection and for livelihood. According to Ibn Khaldun, these laws actually, they take away and they destroy, he says, they destroy the fortitude and power of resistance. So he begins by saying, not everyone is master of his own affairs. Not everyone is master of his own affairs. This is really interesting. We live in sedentary societies for the most part. If you're on this call right now, chances are you live in a place where there is internet connection, maybe it's a city, a town. You live in a sedentary lifestyle. And Khaldun says, not everyone is a master of his own affairs. These sedentary societies we live in, we are being told that we are individuals. We have our own right to expression. We have the decision to make, to decide whatever we want in our own lives. In other words, we are the masters of our own selves. And the reality couldn't be any farther from that. Ibn Khaldun begins in this chapter by saying, not everyone is a master of his own affairs. The facade that each individual in society is individual in the absolute form, and they decide what happens, and they have freedom to say what they like and to do what they like, and it's their right to do what they like. The reality on the ground is A few number of people have that level of mastery over their own affairs. In other words, your decisions, the decisions you make in life, how you live, the things you choose to do for a living, where you can go, the things you accept. Most of us don't have control, the control we think we have. We are dependent on other people. We are dependent on other people and systems. So the majority of people don't have that control. Okay? That's a very powerful statement. Most people on earth don't have that control, okay? Especially those who live in sedentary environments. Then he goes on to say chiefs and leaders who are the masters. So if you don't have mastery over yourself, that means by necessity somebody else has mastery over you. If you are not fully independent, somebody else has mastery over you. Whether you accept that or you don't accept it. You know, when you hear, for example, people go on rallies and marches, or they go on television and they say, I'm an individual, I have the right to do what I like. The government can't tell me what to... That's not the reality. The reality is you are under the control or influence of people who really have control in terms of the systematic control of how things are done in your society, what you can and can't get away with. You are not entirely independent. That's a facade of modern sedentary lifestyle, that you have control. You don't have control. So he says, because of that being a reality, the chiefs and the leaders, people who are really in charge and who are in control of the affairs of men, they are in few. There are few people in that position compared to the rest. They're a minority. Those who are truly in charge, who really have influence, they are a few compared to the majority of people. Think about that for a moment. We live in liberal societies, right? We live in modern societies. The illusion that we've been given, most of us, is we are completely free. I do what I like. It's my life. Nobody can decide for me. I'm an individual. I have the right. The reality is, the vast majority of people in these societies are not as free as they think they are, and they are certainly not masters of their own individual lives. There will always be a class of people, as he mentioned, the chief and the leaders here, who are the real leaders, and they are always in a minority. So as a rule, he says, man must by necessity be dominated by someone else. Allahu Akbar. By necessity. And Ibn Khaldun, I should mention that he is definitely somebody who believes in social hierarchies. Later on in the book, we will explore how he will advise us to interact with those who are in power, how we should interact with them, because there is an etiquette and a standard we should abide by. Our perception of reality has been completely skewed by the idea that we have complete freedom. He's telling us at the very beginning of this chapter, a few people have that level of mastery over themselves, let alone others, and that there are people who are in charge of the rest of the people, and by necessity, the human being needs to be dominated by somebody else. Needs to be dominated by somebody else. If you look at, for example, the case in Syria, recently, the case in Syria, and we have seen how the story has really changed dramatically over the last 4 weeks only. It's really changed dramatically. The reality is, when Bashar was removed, people were screaming Hurriya, freedom. Freedom, and this is natural because there is a relief. 50 years of oppression, relief. What you don't realize is a society cannot operate upon freedom. It doesn't work that way, guys. I'm sorry. A society cannot operate purely on freedom. It doesn't work that way. Because most human beings cannot operate upon freedom. If it was given to them completely, they couldn't survive. Most people cannot survive completely free. By necessity, they require for somebody to dominate over them. Now, this domination can be a good dominate in terms of people who are good leaders, good governments who look after the people and their needs, but it can also be a bad government or bad people One thing is essential. Either way, the people need somebody to dominate over them. Okay? It's necessary. So Ibn Khaldun, first of all, tells us about that. Then he says, because there are two types of domination, if domination is kind and just, and the people under it are not oppressed by the laws and restrictions, they are guided by the courage or cowardice that they possess in themselves. Let me repeat. Because he begins by saying most people are not able to control or to be masters of their own affairs. Most people, the majority of human beings, don't have that capacity. Therefore, there will always be a need for some class of people who are in the minority to control the rest of the people. Because human beings need that. There is no free society, guys. Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. There are illusions of freedom, but it doesn't exist in reality. Because we need to have control mechanisms. We need people on top to control what the rest of us. We have to have these boundaries. Now, that being the case, the only distinction left is between a good domination or a bad domination. Ibn Khaldun is telling us, in the best situation, you have a good leader or a good government or a good regime. Two things can happen. They look after your affairs, society is going well, everything is good. That leaves you with two options. You can either, as an individual now, because everything is going well, you can be guided by the courage that's innate in you. So if you're a good person, a virtuous person, a loyal person, a person who serves society, when you are under a good leader, you will only be a better person. But if you are somebody who is a coward, somebody who is a criminal, somebody who cheats, who lies, when you have a good government, you will continue to be a cheat and a liar and a thief and a criminal. Why is that the case? Why is it that if you are under a good government, it doesn't make you a good person? Think about that for a moment, guys. Because all of our problems in the Ummah, we say the governments are bad, the leaders are bad. If we change the leaders and the governments, the Ummah will be restored. Ibn Khaldun is saying, no, not necessarily. If you as an individual do not possess the qualities, even if your leaders are good and the government is good, it doesn't make you good. Let me repeat that. If the domination, and again, it's still domination, it's not a democracy, it's still a domination. We require that level of control or that level of influence above us. But if it happens to be a good one, if it is kind and just, and the people are not oppressed, so this is effectively is a righteous ruler, it's a good government. Ibn Khaldun says, in that case, the people, the population, are guided by the courage or cowardice that they possess in themselves. So if the rulers are good and the government is good, but the people are not good, what does that mean? What will happen? You have a good governor, a good establishment. They're doing the right things, but the people are not good people. What will that leave? What's the result of that? Ibn Khaldun says, well, it's only as good as the people underneath that government. Because what will happen eventually is that if you live in a good society, everything is working perfectly. The rules are not oppressive. The economy is working. They're developing the industries around you. You have jobs and everything else. But if you, as he says, if you're a coward or if you have negative traits, this gives you the opportunity to exploit the positive environment. You have the opportunity to exploit that stability. You have the opportunity to abuse that stability. Okay? It only gives you the opportunity to indulge upon those things. But if you're a good person, it will only give you the opportunity to do what? To do more good. So the first lesson here is, the issue is not about changing the presidents, the guy on top, or even the governments. The underlying issue is the individuals in society. Are you the person calling for a new Khalifa, a new king, a new president, a new revolution? Are you the sort of person who, if you were in the ideal conditions, would be a good person, a good citizen? Are you somebody who can contribute positively? whether the leader is good or bad. That's the question, because that's what makes a society work, ultimately speaking. If the people on the bottom, the grassroots, are rectified, everything else will be easier. But it's not a matter of just changing the guy on top. That's what it's telling you essentially here. It won't just be fixed because you change the guy on top. Okay? And he should know, because he was obviously a bureaucrat, somebody who worked in various administrations. He's seen it all effectively. So he would have good insight. Then he says, they are satisfied with the absence of any restraining power. Self-reliance eventually becomes a quality natural to them. So effectively, and they will know nothing else. So when the ruler is good, when the government is working, when everything is going well, individuals are left to their own device. And as a result of that, they are satisfied that they don't have to be oppressed with laws. They don't have to be forced to do things. They become used to that. They are happy in that lifestyle where they can get to do what they like, and they're not being forced one way or the other. Self-reliance eventually becomes a quality natural to them, because they have the luxury of being able to operate freely, to set up businesses, to run their own things. They become more self-reliant. They have freedom, effectively, to do things. It's a free market. It's a free society. They have the ability to be self-starting. And they get used to that, so they know nothing else. However, if the domination or the law, the government, is one that has brute force behind it, an intimidation, one that is oppressive, a dictatorship, a tyranny, then it will break their fortitude and deprive them of their power of resistance. And as a result of the inertness that develops in the soul of the oppressed, so that's basically, if you have a government that is oppressive, that is tyrannical, that is wicked, it will break the people. It will break the people. And these people being broken will no longer have the ability to act upon, effectively, on their own initiative. They become people who are broken, effectively. And he says that it breaks them. It breaks the population. Okay, so it's not a good thing to have a ruler that is very, very tyrannical or very harsh upon the people, because what happens is you kill the morale. You kill their morale to do things. And he explains an example here in the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. Okay, and I think let's explore this, because it's quite interesting. The last session, or the one before that, the issue of advising the ruler in public came up. And I think in the group somebody said that it's a duty upon people to advise the ruler. And I remember saying there are incidents in the lifetime of the Sahaba where advising somebody publicly was discouraged, because it could cause a public scene that could demoralize people. So here's an example of that. Umar radiallahu anhu, he forbade Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu to exercise such. So for example, there was an incident here where there was a warrior, a mujahid, who took spoils, who took some of the ghanima, 75,000 gold pieces. And this was following al-Qadisiyah, the very famous battle al-Qadisiyah. So this warrior, Zuhra, he managed to kill one of the soldiers or commanders, a senior person in the opposite army. This Muslim soldier managed to follow him, to kill him. And when he killed him, he acquired 75,000 gold pieces as part of the booty, the ghanima. So this soldier took it for himself, and rightfully so. When the commander Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas radiallahu anhu came to know of this, he confiscated that money. And he said to him, why did you not wait for me to give you the command? Why did you do it without a command that you could take this money? Why did you not wait for my permission to follow him? In other words, to go and kill that person and to take the money. So he wrote to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu to demand a ruling from him that I can confiscate this money from this warrior. Sayyidina Umar responds and he says, listen to this. Would you want to proceed against a man like Zuhra? Do you want to do this, in other words? Do you want to follow through by taking away what he has earned? Although he's a very well-known warrior and he spent so much time and effort fi sabilillah. Do you want to do this? While the war is not over yet. You still need him for the war. And he says, do you really want to do this to him now? To correct him now? Because would you want to break his strength and morale? Would you want to break his strength and morale? Thus, Omar confirmed that Zuhra possessed. So, in other words, to paraphrase, he says to Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, don't correct him this way. Don't correct him this way. If you were to do that now, you break his morale and you break his strength. And you need this man to win the war. You need him to win the war. So Umar said, I would advise you not to do that. I know you're trying to prove a point, but if you were to do that, you will break his morale and you will break his resolve, his strength. And you need this man to be able to win the war. Okay? And he wasn't the leader, he was one of the soldiers, but he was a key warrior. There are other examples of governors correcting people in public and other Sahaba coming and telling them, don't do this. Later on in private, they would rebuke those people who said to them, don't do this, because by doing that in public, you have effectively, you've undermined my authority in public. And that's not good for the general public. It won't be good generally speaking. Okay? So here's an example where he mentions a good leader, but effectively he tried to enforce a certain law, and it wasn't the right thing to do at that time because it had a greater impact on the morale, confidence, and spirit of that warrior. Okay? So this is an example of Sayyidina Umar and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas being good rulers who didn't enforce the law. They didn't crush the people with law. They took into consideration the greater good. These are good people. Of course, they're good people. However, it's not always the case. So Ibn Khaldun says when laws are enforced by means of punishment, as a means of punishing people, as a means of crushing the spirits, they destroy the fortitude. So the people who are under these sorts of harsh regimes, it destroys them. It destroys them. It doesn't build them, it destroys them. Okay. However, on the opposite, when laws are put in place to educate, to instruct, and to effectively teach children as they grow up about obeying the laws and abiding by these laws, according to Ibn Khaldun, according to him, it has the same effect. In other words, those people who are raised with laws only, this is allowed, this is not allowed, they have to some degree the same effect. It crushes them. How? Because people, when they grow up in fear, because people then grow up in fear and docility, and consequently do not rely on their own fortitude. When laws are intended to serve the purpose of education and instruction and are applied from childhood, they have to some degree the same effect. In other words, they destroy the fortitude. Why? He says because people grow up in fear and docility and consequently do not rely on their own fortitude. This is very powerful. How do I demonstrate this? So I want you to imagine your child reaches the age of 7, and as we know, as Muslims, we should start encouraging them to pray at 7, and by 10 there should be consequences for not praying. You have two ways of enacting this or implementing this law. The first way is you are effectively somebody governing their behavior as a parent. The first way is to teach them in a way that doesn't break them. In the same way Sayyidina Umar advised, don't break his morale. You need him later on. You can teach your children without breaking them, and there are ways of doing that. The alternative is to punish them. To take that hadith literally and to punish your child for not praying. You destroy that child. You destroy the fortitude. Furthermore, you can entice them to pray with certain hadith or certain ayat or certain examples. Or you can scare them into, if you don't pray, you're going to go to Jahannam. If you don't pray, you become kafir. If you don't pray, you're going to get punished in the grave. So what he says is this way of weaponizing the law against your child has the opposite effect later on. They grow up in fear. So for them, prayer will be affiliated with fear, the sentiment of fear, docility. They become docile. They don't think critically. They become docile. And consequently, they don't have any fortitude. They become weak individuals in that sense. So Ibn Khaldun here is striking a great balance between when somebody is ruling or somebody is governing, being too harsh upon the people. Right? So for example, controlling the movements of people. Controlling people, whether are you praying or not praying. Checking on people, are you praying or not praying? wearing a hijab, that has an impact later on the people. They don't have freedom to express themselves, right, voluntarily. But at the same time, if you only teach it as a law or you use it to weaponize the law to scare people into it, they have the same impact. They don't have that internal mechanism to do things because they want to do them. It is out of fear, and their morale is broken. Okay, this is important because again, we're talking about governments here. We're talking about governors. We're talking about laws. We're talking about systems. It's very clear when you read history, there is no such thing as a free society. There is no such thing as a free society. Okay, we don't live one in now. We don't live in one now. I suspect we will never live in one. It's not possible. Societies need structure and order. That requires people in position to enforce laws, whether we agree with those laws or not. It requires that. And it requires for us to follow those laws. Okay? So in the Western tradition, one of the most influential books on this, and it's quite an interesting study actually, if you want to look into legal theory, but also society, social contract. This is a very, very famous book, The Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes. Okay, it talks about the necessity of leadership. You need to have leaders. Okay, in his day and age, it was kingdoms, kings. You need to have them, and the role they play. You don't have to have a perfect leader for society to work. I keep saying this all the time. It's not about the leader being perfect. It's about respecting the system of governance in place in your country, understanding the hierarchy of what is essentially the most important thing we need in our country for stability, and working on the rest. It's not about the leader, it's about the system, the entire system. So he mentions these issues, very interesting, but also talks about social contract. The nature of man, which Ibn Khaldun touches upon here. Man is not a master of himself. He's not a master of his own affairs. He always needs somebody. There will always be a need for people to control the affairs of the rest of the people. And that effectively becomes government. The social contract. Okay, so this is where we will get into this in future sessions. Ibn Khaldun tells us, if you are amongst the ruled people, those who are subject to other people's governance, there is a certain way to speak to those people. There is a certain way to interact with them. Otherwise, they will crush you. And this knowledge is essential for us, especially those of us who like to criticize governments. You need to understand there is a way to interact with people of power and authority. Otherwise, they will crush you. So social contract deals with that. But also, he talks of, for example, the nature of man, social contract, religion, which at the time in the West was necessary to be a king, a government, and the kingdom of darkness and ignorance. And these are really interesting. But again, for those who are interested in that, the Leviathan, very, very powerful. It will change your perspective on governments, social contracts, how societies work. So far, Ibn Khaldun has told us some quite interesting things about the laws in society. The first thing he begins with is most people are not in control of their own affairs. So that, therefore, they need somebody else to manage that for them. So these chiefs and leaders in position in the Islamic tradition, we would know these people as Ahlul Halli wal Aqd, the people who tie and untie. The people in society who tie and untie. What does that mean? They are the people who decide who's in power and who's not in power. Who gets our vote? Who doesn't get our vote? Those people are not the majority. They are not the majority. They are representatives of the majority. Ahlul Halli wal Aqd. Right? So they will not be amongst the majority. It won't be a free-for-all. Everyone decides who gets to be the ruler. It doesn't work that way. There is a small contingent of people in every society. Again, whether you like it or not, it's a reality. They are the real movers and shakers. And they are the people who we, as the people under them, al-awam, we depend upon them to represent us to the leader. That is to say, it's not upon us, the individuals, to reach up to the leader directly and advise him. There is a representative body. As Ibn Khaldun says, most of us can't even control our own affairs, let alone the affairs of the state. That's a reality. It's a bitter pill, but let's take the bitter pill and cure ourselves before we end up in a very difficult situation. That's the situation here. So now he gets into a bit more interesting territory. So we discuss here the issue of man-made laws and the evolution of law in Islamic society. And this is really where we strike some interesting ideas and discussions. Because he says, you could say, for example, his argument here that the laws, a system of governance, can weaken a person's ability to think critically, can weaken a person's ability to do things with sincerity or to do things out of free will. Somebody could say to you, religion is a law. Islam comes with a law. And so, according to Ibn Khaldun, the Sharia is restrictive. The Sharia will actually make you, will scare you into doing things rather than doing it for your own self. It will scare you to do things. Ibn Khaldun is very clear in telling you from the beginning. It is no argument against the men around Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, who observed the religious laws. So everything he said so far about laws potentially curtailing your ability to think critically and to act sincerely, it doesn't apply to Sharia. He makes it very clear. What he's just said is no argument against the fact that the Sahaba around Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were not curtailed. They were not being frightened into following the law. They were not being coerced or oppressed. The opposite is the case here. He says, they were, of course, observing the law, yet they did not experience any diminution of their fortitude. They didn't experience any lessening, any decrease in their fortitude. Fortitude being the ability to do things on your own self, by your own self, the voluntary spirit to do things, not being coerced, having a free ability to express yourself. The Islamic law in that time did not restrict them or decrease that for them. However, what he says is, but they possessed the greatest possible fortitude. They had the greatest amounts of fortitude in that day and age. At that time, he mentions, it was not a result of technical instruction or scientific education. So the Sahaba, let's bring it down to ordinary speech here. The companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they did not have a madhab. They had a madhab, but it wasn't the madhab that we know, the madhab we have today. It wasn't a code of laws that they read and memorize, okay? They didn't have the books and massive collections of laws that we have today. He says, despite that they had very, very few laws, very few external factors to control them. They still had the greatest possible fortitude. They had the greatest level of self-control, the greatest level of sincerity, the greatest level of courage. Despite not having all of the laws that we need today to survive as Muslims, they had the greatest level of fortitude. And then he says something very interesting. That which they attained was not a result of technical instruction or scientific education. What they attained in their taqwa, in their ikhlas, was not a result of technical instruction. In other words, in the same way we would sit down and have to listen to a lecture or have fatwa or have books taught to us about how to be in the masjid, how to behave in the masjid, how to interact with people in the marketplace. They did not need that level of instruction to operate on the highest level of ethics and moral standards. They didn't need that. Neither was it a scientific education. They didn't have to go to university for 8, 10, 20 years to have that level of consciousness. They didn't need any of that. Okay? Why? Because they were in an environment where these things were natural to them. The environment molded them. The environment was healthy. The environment was one that permitted them to become the highest possible form of themselves, version of themselves, without necessarily having the physical restrictions, the physical laws, the physical parameters that we have today in many nations. They were able to attain that without any of these physical barriers. So for example, let's take an example here. The companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know the Masjid al-Nabi. How was it designed? It was an open plan masjid. It was an open plan masjid. There were no barriers between the men and women. There was no wall. There was no screen between the men and the women section. We have many accounts of companions, the male companions, who could see the women praying behind. It wasn't something that was a physical barrier necessary in that masjid. Yet those people who prayed in that were the greatest human beings after the prophets. They were the people upon whom the ayat of Quran would descend upon in that same masjid. Why is it that they were able to do that without a physical barrier? Why did they not need a physical barrier to separate the men and women? And we need it so desperately today. Why is that the case? Ibn Khaldun says they attained that level without having to go to universities, without having to be technically instructed to do certain things. Technical Islam is another problem. The technicality of religion is another problem. He says they didn't need that because the environments and the people around them were such that it cultivated in them a natural fortitude. In them, naturally a fortitude that they can go anywhere on earth and they can be the same people. They wouldn't need the laws to impose upon them how to behave themselves in the masjid. When the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after he died, alayhi salatu wasalam, they spread around the world. They went around the world spreading Islam. And they entered into new and wonderful regions. When they reached, for example, Iraq, wonderful, wonderful region, fertile crescent, amazing. One companion sent a letter back to, subhanallah, Sayyidina Salman al-Farisi, radiallahu anhu. And he tells him, Salman, come to this land, either Iraq or Damascus or Jerusalem, one of these major cities at the time when it was conquered. He called him to come and live there. Come, the land is fertile, you know, it's a historic site, there are many prophets buried here. Come, come, come. It's a pure land. Of course, Medina is pure, but he's inviting him to come. So Salman responds, very, very powerful response. He says to him, Al-ardu la yuqaddisu ahada. Al-ardu la yuqaddisu ahada. The land does not make of any human being a good person, doesn't purify a person. The land doesn't make a person a good person. It's not the land that is pure, it is the people in that land who are pure. You don't just shift from one country to another country and suddenly everything is erased. It's something inside of you that makes that possible. Something within you. So the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they could walk in your masjid today, and if there was no barrier between the men and women, they can pray. And it would be no problem for them. They wouldn't cry about a barrier. Because within how they were taught Islam and the society they lived in and what they saw when Muhammad was alive, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they didn't need barriers to be good, decent human beings. And this is what he's pointing out here. Neither did they have to take a degree or study for 15, 20 years to attain a level of consciousness that would permit them to operate in the world with ihsan. They didn't need any of that. It was natural. Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu, he says, Umar desired that everyone should have his restraining influence in himself. Allahu Akbar. And when I say Sayyidina Umar, really, just a tremendous human being. Al-Faruq. Al-Faruq. He desired, because you could say, those were the companions, they were the Sahaba. It's not for us to be like them because they are above us. We can never be like them. So we need to have barriers because we're not like them. Ibn Khaldun says, Umar desired, had irada, had the desire that everyone should have his restraining influence in himself. In other words, the law is within you. You are carrying the law. Whether or not there is a person looking at you, are you praying your prayers on time or not? Within yourself, you have the self-restraints to do the right thing wherever you are. حيثما كنت. اتق الله حيثما كنت. Fear Allah wherever you are. Wherever you are. Okay? So in other words, what he had learnt during his time in Medina with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he desired for everyone to have the same attitude. He desired the objective. The objective is, if he could help it, everyone in society would have that same internal balance and restraint. It also expresses, he says, his certainty. The Sayyidina Umar is certain that the lawgiver Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew best what is good for mankind. So let me bring the hadith back that we were discussing in the group earlier on, because now it comes into context here. Very famous hadith of certain companions who were not happy that their wives would go and pray Fajr in the masjid. Okay, they would pray Fajr in the masjid in Medina. They were not happy with that. And so the news came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the men sought some sort of ruling to prohibit the women from praying in the masjid for Fajr. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, do not prohibit them from doing so. If your wife demands permission to go and pray in the masjid for Fajr, the Prophet said sallallahu alaihi wasallam, don't stop them from doing so. Don't prohibit them. You could argue, well, it's not safe for women to travel in the morning to go and pray Fajr. She can be attacked, she can be harassed. So Umar says, well, ideally, that would never be the case, because the one attacking would have self-control, would have self-restraint and self-control, not to have to attack a woman. He would have self-control in himself, that he wouldn't have to attack. He would be able to restrain his urges. That's where the issue is. But also he says, he is certain that the law of Muhammad, what Muhammad said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is what is best for mankind. There is no, he didn't know. In his time it was different. No, what he said was the best for mankind. But it comes back to the internal, the ability for the people in society to self-regulate. Not to have a police officer standing behind every corner to monitor and to make sure that you're doing the right thing, but that within yourself, you have that restraint to do the right thing. This is the most important thing here. So religion, then he explains, but it was an ideal. This is an ideal. It's like the ihsan when Sayyidina Jibreel came, said, Ya Muhammad, akhbirni anil Islam, بعدين anil iman, and ultimately, akhbirni anil ihsan. Tell me about ihsan, excellence. And our Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, al-ihsan an ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah, that you worship Allah as if you see Him. And if you cannot see Him, and you surely cannot see Him, then you are cognizant that He can see you. In other words, you don't have to have a camera pointing at you. You don't have to have a police officer behind the corner. You don't have to have a wall to stop you from doing bad things. Within yourself, you have the self-restraint to do the right thing, whether or not there are people around looking or watching. This is the ultimate. Sayyidina Umar desired that. He says, Umar desired that everyone should have his restraining influence in himself. It doesn't have to be imposed upon them by force. It's within them. Okay, it's an ideal. It isn't a reality. It's an ideal. So Ibn Khaldun explains, how do we fall from that ideal? He says, the influence of religion decreased among men. Pay attention. When people were acting upon the law, the spirit of Islam, they couldn't pray in the masjid, and there would be no walls between men and women, because they were self-controlling. They can restrain themselves. When that is lost, when the influence of religion is decreased amongst men, they came to use restraining laws. So when the natural laws or the organic laws became less and less visible and less influential in society, he says they replaced that with restraining laws. So this is where you have books and you begin to write, okay, it's not allowed to do this, it's not allowed to do that. And you have this proliferates. And it becomes a book of laws. And these laws are now imposed in society. So these laws became a branch of learning and a craft. And a craft to be acquired through instruction and education, subhanAllah. Yeah. So what was natural in the first generations became a craft, a profession, and it became a science. It became effectively, let me measure my words here. It was no longer a living discipline. It was a cold discipline, ink and paper. It became a craft. You earn a living from it. It became a science, a discipline, one that you have to be instructed to do and educated to acquire, not something that comes because you're in the environments where things are working a certain way. And this, by the way, it describes the madhab of Imam Malik, radiallahu anhu. Imam Malik in Medina, he preferred always to go by the ada, the tradition of Ahlul Medina, and the sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, rather than the laws written down as hadith. Anytime he had the opportunity to distinguish between this is a written hadith and this is the amalu Ahlul Medina, in other words, what they do, he would take what they did. That was a priority for him, not what was written down. He understood, and this is why personally I love the Maliki madhab. That's the closer madhab to me, because that is the most natural when it comes to just following what was done. The essence of Islam, not the laws written down. You can do this technically, no. He went with the essence. And he would say, I would rather follow the examples of Ahlul Medina. Even if a hadith came to him authentically, but he found them doing something else, he would do what they did. He understood. That's the essence of it. How they behaved. It wasn't just a piece of paper given to him with a hadith. It was an entire lifestyle. It was an essence, a spirit in them. How they behaved, how they acted, how they made adhan, how they prayed, how they spoke to one another. Right? All of these things for him was a priority over the written word. Because later on, when things become written, they are codified. And when they are codified, they become technicalities in the deen. They become technicalities in the deen. So Ibn Khaldun acknowledges that by telling us that this, the essence, essentially became a branch of science. It became a craft, a profession, something that you can go to university for and get a piece of paper after 3, 4, 5, 10 years. People turn to sedentary life and assume the character trait of submissiveness to law. So over time, when societies developed, cities grew, and it was no longer what it used to be. This was now a metropolis. For example, in Baghdad, it had up to 1 million citizens at one point. People turned to these laws. They had nothing left but these laws, and they became sedentary. This, however, led to the decrease in their fortitude. It decreased their character. To rely purely on the laws, halal, haram, black, white, rather than the essence, the thing that made you a good Muslim wherever you go. The internal restraint that Sayyidina Umar wanted everyone to have, that declined. And what increased to replace that were the laws. This is why, for example, when we discuss, again, this is a good example just to highlight, okay? When we discuss the issue of the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ not having walls and barriers, my perspective is the essence of it, the ihsan, is that you don't need barriers. But the technicality comes, somebody could say, well, actually the Imam came from 3 generations later, he said because of this and that. Yes, because he's living at a time when it's sedentary. By the time you're talking to me about the evidence coming later on, books are being written. You might have 10 books on how to make wudu, right? So things became more elaborate, more mechanical. So you're going to argue for another 10 days. But the essence of what I'm telling you is that these books are there to substitute something that was originally there. They are substitutes. But the essence is you don't need a barrier. You shouldn't need a barrier. That's the essence. Because that's how the first generation came up. It's only because we don't have that essence that we rely upon the laws. And over-reliance on these laws, again, I'm not advocating not to obey Sharia, I'm giving you an example here. It decreased their fortitude, Ibn Khaldun says. What does that mean? Let me give you an example. A child who grows up in a household where they are told how to do everything. So for example, after drinking, your parent says to you, okay, now you need to go and thank your mother for making food for you or for giving you something to drink. Everything they do has to be written for them in a code. Otherwise, they just don't do it, right? A household where everything has to be written in codes and taught as a science. Say this, do that. That's not a good way to raise a child. Because what happens when the laws are no longer being monitored? How does your child behave? Okay, they are taught to go by the laws only, not the spirit. Another household, there is no law, there's no book for the child to read and study. Rather, the parents teach the child through actions, through interaction, mu'amalat, the essence of being a good human being, the lessons behind being grateful to people, gratitude, to show appreciation, to be kind. I don't have to tell you every single instance of when to be kind and how to be kind and what to say, and if the person gives you an apple and not an orange. I don't have to go down that route and write a book for every single interaction. What I can do is instill in you something in you that whatever happens in the future, you have the right ability, the right mindset. You'll be appreciative. Okay? So that first generation had that. They had that tarbiyah, where they didn't need to have a book or books or libraries with technicalities about what to do in the masjid and what not to do in the masjid, because they were brought up correctly. Later on, however, we need these books. And this, he says, it decreases fortitude. And I agree with him, quite frankly. Because if I hear somebody say to me, for example, the sisters can't be in the masjid, it's fitna, my first issue with that statement is, first of all, are you going to the masjid to worship Allah? Or are you going to the masjid because the sisters are there? What's the objective of going to the masjid? Because your objective should be so clear and so overwhelming. It doesn't matter if shaitan entered the masjid and prayed. You shouldn't be concerned with that. Your concern is, I came to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My objective is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me focus on my worship of Allah. That's the primary focus for you when you go to the masjid. Not who's attending, how are they dressed, do they have a tattoo on their arm, right? Because at that point, you have lost the essence of going to the masjid. You've lost the essence. The essence is whoever enters the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a welcome guest, no matter how they look. Okay? Allah has brought them there for a reason. He's invited them there for a reason. And you should look at that person as somebody who's been invited to the house of Allah. Somebody who has the desire and the will and the drive to go to the masjid. They could have been at home. They were in the masjid. There's a famous example, an anecdote, of a woman whose husband gave her talaq 3 times. Okay? He gave her talaq 3 times. And when he gave her talaq, she loved her husband. She loved her husband. And he gave her talaq 3 times. So she ran out the house in a frenzy. She ran out the house in a frenzy. She ran down the roads and she went to the imam's house. She began to knock frantically. He opens the door and he sees this woman. Her hair is disheveled. Okay, she hasn't dressed up properly. She hasn't even bothered to put on makeup or anything like that. She was so distraught. She just ran out the house, okay, and went to the imam's office or house. When she got there, he looked at her condition, and the first thing he said was, Astaghfirullah. Sister, you don't wear hijab. And this is what she says to him. My love for my husband, who's a human being and who has wronged me, my love is such that it blinded me to my own condition. I didn't even do it on purpose. I didn't even realize I left the house without hijab. It wasn't intentional, because my love for the human being who oppressed me was such that I didn't even bother to think about the hijab. It just escaped my mind. But I come to you who claims to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You claim to be in love with the creative man and everything else. And your love wasn't enough to blind you from a slave of Allah coming to you for help, subhanallah. Look how profound the words are. You go to the masjid to worship Allah because you love Allah, because you believe in Allah, because Allah is your Rabb and you are going to worship Him. Well, that should be so great of an action that a woman walking past, she's wearing full khimar, full hijab, sometimes full niqab, shouldn't be an issue. That should be not an issue at all for you, because you are going for a greater purpose. It's like when Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says to Aisha, Yawm al-Qiyamah, men and women will be standing, waiting for judgment, and we will all be barefoot and circumcised. And Aisha says, Ya Rasulullah, will men and women be looking at each other? What does he say to her? What's the response? Somebody please help me. What's the response? He says to her, on the day of judgment, men and women, old and young, black and white, rich and poor, every human being will be standing on the same plane, naked. Aisha says, radiallahu anha, Ya Rasulullah, will the men and the women not look at one another's nakedness? That's her concern. What was his response? What was his response? Somebody please help me out here.
I think he said that they will be so they will have so much fear that they won't even like think about that.
Yeah,
Something along those lines.
he said the situation will be so dire. No one has time for that. Yeah, Aisha. The situation on that day will be such that no one has time for that. Yani, we're not thinking on that level. Yeah, Aisha. Yeah? We're not thinking on that level. When you're in the masjid, you should be in that condition. You shouldn't be thinking on that level. You're about to engage in ibadah. You're about to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the level we're operating on. The companions were on that level in the masjid. That's what they were operating on. So a barrier here and there. That wasn't their concern here. The concern was, I'm coming to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my creator. Yeah. It wasn't a concern. They didn't ask these questions. So over-reliance, however, over-reliance upon these laws, it decreases your ability to have fortitude in yourself. So for example, and we've seen this, I mean, these are examples we probably, for those of us who travel, know about this. In societies where segregation between men and women is strictly enforced by the government, I'm going to ruffle a few feathers here. I said in societies where segregation between men and women is strictly regulated by a government, what happens when those people travel outside the country and they go to a society where there is no government intervention? What happens generally?
They become very loose people.
Yeah, yeah.
The loosest people of even more than the people in that country.
Even if they're not loose, they are easily tempted. Why is that? Why do you think that is?
You're in a box, and then you just broke free of that box, and everything's just available like you've never seen it before.
Yeah, because you haven't been in an environment where that muscle of restraint was never exercised. You didn't have to exercise it because somebody else was doing it for you. You never had to exercise self-control and restraint. So when you're put in a position where there is no external limiting law or factor, you have a greater difficulty to contain yourself. Yeah? It actually weakens you rather than strengthening you. It weakens you rather than strengthening you. For those of us who like to garden, people have green fingers. There is something known as weathering. I may get the term wrong, weathering. This is where if you are growing plants, for example, inside your house or in a greenhouse, what you've done is you have isolated that plant from the elements of nature. Okay? So you regulate, for example, the sun, the light, the artificial light. You regulate the water that you feed it. You regulate everything in the environment. So that plant will of course grow, okay, it will be fruitful because it's in the perfect conditions, but these are artificial conditions. What happens when you take that plant out of that environment and put it in a natural environment? Let's say you spent a whole year cultivating the plant and the crop. You put it in a greenhouse, regulated everything, temperature, light, water. And one fine day after a year of doing that, you put it out into just a general environment and left it to the elements. You weaken the plant. So what good gardeners do is, while the plant is still developing, right, they will put it out into the elements once in a while. So you take the pot, the plant, and you put it out. Like if you have a windowsill, you put it out there during the daytime. Why would you want to do that? Can anyone hazard a guess? Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to take a plant out of your house, out of your green box, and put it out in a garden maybe, or maybe on your windowsill a couple of hours a day? What could be the benefit of doing that?
To
To get
expose it.
accustomed.
Sorry, to do what?
To get accustomed to the weather.
Yes, it's called weathering. So what you do is, because naturally what happens is plants and trees, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, look how Allah designs things. How wonderful. The wind that hits the plant and hits, for example, the leaves, it strengthens the plant. It makes it more resilient. When you keep it in a house or in a green, there's no wind. So it doesn't get to develop the roots and the trunk, right? That core element is not developed because it's never had to push against the force of nature. Never. It grew up in a perfectly isolated environment. Everything is perfect. So the day you put it out there, it will suffer. Whereas the natural plants in the environment, every day they're being pushed by the wind, left and right. And they grow resilient because of that environment. Okay, they're not restricted. They're in a natural environment. Likewise, the sun comes, and sometimes it doesn't come. The rain comes, sometimes it doesn't. So it becomes more resilient, and it adapts to the environment around it, the natural environment. So Islam, when you have an Islam that is in a green box, if your Islam is in a green box, when you enter the real world, you will not survive. You want to be in an Islamic state. The laws you abide by, Ibn Khaldun is mentioning here, they are natural. You develop these skills in a natural world, in a world where men and women can interact. Your iman is not going to evaporate because you saw a woman going in and out the masjid, subhanAllah. Okay? It shouldn't evaporate because of that. Ibn Battuta traveled around the world, as we know, and he wrote extensively about his experiences with different societies. One of the recurring themes, wherever he went, whether to the east or to the west, wherever he went, he spoke about women. He spoke about the women, okay? Some women were very soft, easygoing. Others were a bit more, you could say, empowered. When he went to the Far East, he found them to be mild people, gentle people, okay? And he describes the women as being open. In other words, they didn't dress, they didn't cover everything. In that custom, in that land, women did not cover everything, okay? He didn't die, essentially. He didn't die. He survived. He survived. He even married a few of them. Then he goes to Mali in West Africa. It's quite an interesting story. And he, first of all, he says the women are exceptionally beautiful. Exceptionally beautiful. Okay? He talks about that extensively. They're very beautiful. As for the men, he says they're very devout. Okay, they worship Allah all the time. They memorize Quran. But the women are very beautiful. He spent a lot of time talking about that. But what concerned him the most was the interaction in that society. He saw men and women interacting openly. One day he went to visit one of the imams, one of the scholars actually, in that locality. And as he entered the house, he saw the scholar's wife, a young woman, casually speaking to another man, just in the doorway, in conversation. And as he walked past, that kind of disturbed him. So when he went to meet the scholar inside the house, he says to him, you need to stop this. How is it possible your wife is outside your house conversing with a man who's not mahram to her? Okay? He didn't like that. What did the man say to Ibn Battuta in response? He says to him, it's our ada, it's our tradition. We're still Muslims. But this is what he says to him. He says, here, we trust our women. He says, here, in this land, we trust our women. Yeah? That's like a knockout. We trust that they are brought up correctly and the society is safe enough and healthy enough that we don't have to be suspicious and worried about conversations outside my house. We trust our women. A very profound statement. The environment is healthy. The interactions will be healthy. If the environment is sick, the interactions will be sick. That's the essence of it. And if you grow up in an environment where everything is controlled, where everything is mechanical, when you experience another environment where things are not mechanical, they are organic, you may find it difficult to restrain yourself. That's why he said here, it leads to the fortification being decreased. So now you rely upon the laws. You demand laws to stop things from happening, because if you don't have those laws, you can't control yourself. So it has thus become clear that governmental and educational laws destroy fortitude. Again, these are like bombshells. Ibn Khaldun, what are you advocating for here? Because he's talking about Muslim society at the time. He's not talking about Britain and France. He's in Egypt. He's in Tunisia. He's in Morocco. He's talking about Muslim society. He says it has become very clear that governmental and educational laws destroy fortitude. Is he advocating for complete anarchy? What is he talking about here? He's not saying to you we shouldn't have any laws. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is to depend on laws for everything, for how to conduct yourself in society. If you are overly dependent on laws, it weakens you. It doesn't strengthen you, it weakens you. Right? So again, another example. I think that when the religious police in Saudi Arabia was banned or was dismantled, was removed a couple of years ago, that was far greater. That's a far greater impact than having the police there. Why? Because people should pray because they want to pray, because they have consciousness that I have to pray. Men and women should interact in a way that is befitting of an interaction between non. You shouldn't have to police that. Over policing creates over dependency, and when there is an opportunity to evade that external law or restriction, people will exploit it. You weaken people that way. So Ibn Khaldun is saying at the government level, if you enforce everything that way, you weaken the people. You're not helping them. You're weakening them. Okay? And this is a very, very powerful thing because, again, we have seen that in societies where people are given that space to exercise their own will, especially when it comes to issues of social interaction, worship, when it is enforced upon them, over time it has the opposite impact on them. Okay, it weakens them. And now they need to have laws to do the right thing. And this is why we have statements such as, we have Western thinkers telling us, for example, with or without religion, good people can behave well and bad people can do evil. But for good people to do evil, that takes religion. Okay, it's a very famous quote atheists will tell us all the time. Do you really need religion to tell you what to do? Can't you just be a good human being? Why do you have to have religion to tell you what to do, right? So with or without religion, good people will be good anyway, and evil will be evil. But the second part, evil, comes from religion. We disagree with him. Ibn Khaldun says, no, actually, religion increases that, makes you a better human being. But the essence of this is, if you are only doing good because it's written in a law you should do good, then you are weak in reality. Yeah? You should be good by essence, and religion only increases that in you. There's another anecdote of Isa ibn Maryam, alayhi salatu wasalam, Jesus, in that when he came, we know he came to abrogate many laws because the Banu Israel were known for having laws. The laws were so extensive. Why did they have to have so many laws? Because they kept making so many mistakes. They were very rebellious, and these people needed laws to behave themselves. That's why they had so many laws. And even then, they found ways to circumvent the laws, to break the laws, to cheat the laws. So having a lot of laws doesn't necessarily mean you're a better society. It just means that you need more laws to stop you from being bad people. So when Isa came, alayhi salatu wasalam, his mission was to remove some of these laws, to bring the people back to the essence of what the message of Musa alayhi salam was. The essence was to be a good human being, to obey Allah and the commandments. You don't have to have laws for everything. So he came and said, I'm going to abrogate some of the laws. Allah sent me to remove some of the laws, okay, so that you can be better human beings. So one of the laws was that they can't work on Sabbath. Okay, working on Sabbath is not allowed. It's in the Quran, by the way, how people try to cheat that law by leaving their nets overnight. So even though they were instructed to do something, they found a way around it. So when Sayyidina Isa came, one of the laws to be abrogated was you can work on Sabbath now. You can till the land, you can fish. So he gave that law. He gave them the news that you don't have to do it anymore. And some people disobeyed. They disagreed with him. They didn't believe in him. So he went away and he came across a farm where there was a man tilling the land on Sabbath, which was prohibited prior to that. The man is tilling the land, is working. Sayyidina Isa says to him, today, on the face of this earth, you are either the best human being on earth or the worst of them. Today, you are either the best human being on earth or the worst amongst men. Why? Because if what you are doing is because you have heard what I've come with, and you have obeyed and you believe in it, and therefore you are now working in Sabbath, you are the best human being. But if you haven't heard my message, or you have heard the message and you disobeyed it, or you don't believe in it, and you are working today, you are the worst human being. Yeah? It's a very profound statement. The action is not what determined whether it's good or bad. It was, how did you understand the message? If you took my message that you can work on Sabbath and you're doing that, you are acting upon the you are the best human being. But if you haven't heard it and you are cheating the old law, you're still an evil human being. Now, technically, you could say, well, technically Islam, technically, the Sharia has changed. So technically, he's not breaking the law. Yeah, that's the technicality of it. Technically. No, Isa says, forget the technicality, alayhi salam. The essence is the same action can be virtuous or can be a bad action, depending on how you understood it. Yeah? That's very powerful. This is why sometimes somebody can give you a fatwa. The fatwa is correct, or the hadith is sahih, but the intention behind why they give you the hadith, the interpretation is not sahih. Okay? Technicality. Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu anhu, we know what happened in the Battle of Siffin in Jamal. Eventually, the armies turned against him, and they began to say to him, you are arbitrating based on the law of man, not upon the law of Allah, and therefore we're going to fight you. Okay, you are now breaking the laws of Allah. In al-hukmu illa lillah. This is in Surah Yusuf. In al-hukmu illa lillah. Amara Allah ta'budu illa iyyah. In al-hukmu illa lillah. So they began to quote this ayah from the Quran. Now, Sayyidina Ali says, kalimatun haqq. What they have said technically is the truth. This law that they want to impose, and it is the truth. Kalimatun haqq. Uridu biha al-batil. But what they desire from this is batil. The law that they present, technically, he says, haqq. It is the truth. It's in the Quran. They're right. ولكن أريد بها الباطل. What they desire from it, the intention is not correct. This is why somebody gives you a hadith. It's not necessarily all you need to hear. You have to hear about the implementation, the context in which the hadith is given, and how it was interpreted and applied. Yeah? Because you need the full package. It makes all the difference. If you rely only on the laws, however, as Ibn Khaldun says here, then it weakens you, because now you are depending, as it says, on the technicalities. You lose what is essentially what we want from you, which is the internal ability to regulate yourself. As the Prophet ﷺ says, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه, that as if you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't need to be told every step of the way, this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. A companion once came and said, Ya Rasulullah, how do I know when I'm doing something bad or something good? He says to him, if your heart of hearts, if your heart, in your heart, you feel ashamed and you don't want people to know what you did, then know that you're doing bad. It's a sin. If in yourself you know or you feel remorse, shame, and you don't want others to find out what you did, then you know you did a bad thing. And then he says, even if other people give you fatwa, even if others give you a law against that, you know you did a bad thing. This is the internal control mechanism at play here, not the technicality. This is really profound stuff. And one of the reasons why I like these chapters, because Ibn Khaldun really is getting to the essence of what makes a society work. A society doesn't work because we have police and we have cameras, CCTV, and we're able to catch criminals. A society truly, 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 truly works when the people, yes, there is police, there's CCTV, but they don't need that to be good citizens. That's when a society truly works. They don't need to be monitored. They don't need to be beaten to pray. They don't need to be forced to the masjid. They don't need to be monitored for their activities. In themselves, they've been brought up in a way where the environment is so healthy, they will do it voluntarily. This is the kind of society that we want to aspire to live in. A society in which our women, we don't have to put barriers in front of them so that they can be safe. No. in the individuals, in that society, there is a barrier in the individual that it doesn't require an external barrier for them to be safe, it's in them. Okay, that's what we want to get to. And so if we are overly reliant, for example, a man who says he wants every woman to wear niqab because for him it's a fitna. Well, what happens the day you wake up and you enter a land where nobody wears niqab? How will you survive in that land? You haven't fortified yourself to survive in that land. How will you survive in that situation? Because you haven't been weathered. You're like that plant in a perfect environment, never had to suffer any of the elements. And suddenly a hurricane comes. How will you survive? You won't survive, you'll crumble. So it's essential that we have this, the connection to the essence. Yeah, the laws are there to help you take your baby steps, okay, to help you, to guide you. But essentially, you should get to a point where you have internal fortitude. And if a society can achieve this, and this is why, personally, again, these are all personal opinions, you don't have to take them. Secular society for me is a failure. It will never attain the level of civility and civilization that we think these nations have, because it does not cultivate the inner law in man. It only cultivates and controls the external laws, the police office, the cameras, the all of these technical things external to us to control us. That's what it does. It doesn't go into the morality of human beings, the ethical standards, how to be a good human being. It doesn't concern itself with that. So it will never be a perfect society because it doesn't deal with the what really makes society work is when the individual internally is a good human being. Likewise, I don't want to just attack the West. In the East and in the Muslim world at large, we've seen this phenomenon where certain people come from certain parts of the Muslim world and they enter a very liberal nations in the West. Germany, for example, one example. And they commit crimes. And when they are apprehended and interviewed, they say, well, in our countries back home, women can't dress the way these women dress. So when we came here, they enticed us, and effectively we can't control ourselves. Yeah? That's a weak excuse. That's essentially saying, I don't have the internal fortitude in me to survive in this environment here. Because where I'm from, it was controlled on my behalf. I didn't have to do anything. It was already done. It was imposed on my behalf. So I didn't have to exercise my own fortitude. So when I come to Europe and I see women who have their hair out and sometimes suggestive, I can't control myself. Islamically, it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse, but here we go. If you are not in an environment that cultivates that internal control, as Sayyidina Umar wanted to happen for everyone, you will not survive when you enter new environments. You won't be able to survive. Okay? And this is a very important thing that we have to consider. When we talk of society, we want to have good leaders. That's great. Ask yourself, are you the kind of person who can follow good leaders? Because you can have 100 good leaders. But if the leadership, the followership is not right, they will fail on the top. You need to find a society of people or environments where the people are cultivated that they can obey their rulers. They can obey their rulers, support their rulers, be patient and advise in a good way. That's when you have good rulers. That's when you have a greater opportunity to have good rulers. Right? Because of the society being one that cultivates that in people. Okay, you have then a good result. But if you have a society that it requires for it to have tyrants, for people to behave themselves, how will you ever have a good leader? Okay? If your society requires police, mukhabarat, you need to be kept in control, otherwise people go haywire. How will you ever have a good leader? It has come from within, right? The internal fortitude. In the time of the Sahaba, people could leave when it was time to pray, they left their market stalls. They didn't have to lock it up. They left it and went to the masjid and prayed. Because the environment was such that you could do that. You didn't have to have a padlock and police officers and everything and alarm bells and everything else. No, you could leave your stuff there and go and pray and then come back. The environment was healthy. The society was healthy, right? It didn't need external factors and laws in place to control basic decency. Somebody has a question here, I believe. Yeah, so Iran, Saudi Arabia, anywhere where it is enforced, taqwa is enforced, or taqwa policing, you have the opposite effects. People will be running from that country. When they come to the West, they become overwhelmed by the supposed freedom, right? What you want to impose upon the people is best when it's done naturally. You can enable it, you can facilitate it, you can encourage it, but you can't enforce it, because again, when it becomes an act of law, when it becomes part of the law, you have mechanized something that is supposed to be natural and organic. You've mechanized it. Imagine, for example, you told your children, maybe they like chocolates, right? Or sweets. Okay, fine. We all like sweets. Some of us maybe not, but we all like nice things. If there was a law that you have to eat a chocolate bar at 5 o'clock every single day, and if you don't eat it, there's a punishment prescribed for you, suddenly it no longer becomes enjoyable. You have codified, you've made it a law now, right? If I don't eat the chocolate bar at 5 o'clock, there's a penalty fine for it, right? It's no longer associated with something positive or natural or organic. It becomes something that frightens people. Okay, that's something that breaks the morale, as he mentions here. And so what they will try to do is evade the law. They will work to evade that law. So you achieve the opposite of what you intended in the first place. Things come easily when they're done naturally. So this was a result of, so all of this effectively, he says, essentially is the more, so for example, the more medication you have is not an indication that you have better medicine. It's an indication of you have more disease. So the more medication we have in society, the more medicine we've developed, it doesn't mean we have become healthier people. It means the opposite. We have become sicker people. That's why we need more medication. So the more laws you have, it doesn't mean you've become refined and better and more ethical. It's the opposite. It means you've become more difficult, more less able to control yourself. More laws, effectively it points that direction there, not the opposite, that you become more righteous people. So thus it becomes clear that government and education, these laws, when they instituted effectively as institutional programs, they destroy fortitude. So this is why, for example, if you live in a land where there is no penalty for whether or not you pray in the masjid or whether or not you wear hijab, but you do so anyway, you are a stronger mu'min, because there's no one forcing you to wear hijab. For the sisters in the West, for example, nobody's forcing them to wear hijab, to go to work or to go to university or to go in public. They are doing it because they want to do it. There's a greater level of ikhlas and mujahada in that than if somebody said, no, by law you have to wear a hijab, otherwise you get punished or you get put in jail. That takes away the agency, takes away the morale, takes away the inner ability to do that. So that sister who wears hijab in London, I'm pretty sure she can wear hijab in Shanghai. I'm pretty sure she has no problem wearing hijab in Delhi, right? But a woman who wears niqab or hijab in a certain country where it's imposed upon her, how do we know that if she was transported to Paris tomorrow, she'll be able to do that of her own free will? She can exercise that level of autonomy and fortitude in her own free will. We don't know. Okay? So the ideal state is these laws are not enforced. Ideally, it's internal, it's inherent in us. So he goes on to say, so because their restraining influence is something that comes from outside, again, as I said before, where the laws come from somebody else, external, a government, an institution, a police officer, it weakens your ability, your inner fortitude is weakened because you no longer have agency anymore. Okay? You're only praying because there is a law that if you don't pray at this time, the police will come and capture you. So where is the agency there? Where is the will, the will, the internal drive to do it for yourself? Right? Where is the virtue in praying at this point? It becomes a civic duty, something that can be punished if you don't do it. So it's no longer virtuous. It's just conformity and compliance, which will destroy what could have been a great skill internally to pray on time voluntarily without being pushed around to pray, for example, or to dress Islamically without being threatened with jail. So Ibn Khaldun, in his society, there would be no forced wearing niqab or no forced praying in the masjid. In his society, people would be cultivated and educated in a way that they would do it naturally. Okay? They wouldn't be forced to do it because he says this will actually destroy rather than build. Okay? The religious laws, on the other hand, do not destroy fortitude because they restrain. Their restraining influence is something inherent. So, true Islam, I'm going to repeat, true Islam is the sort of Islam that it builds character rather than hitting you over the head with fatwa and this statement and that statement and this statement so that you conform out of fear and somebody put it upon you. No, the true Islam is one that is, it encourages you internally, it cultivates you internally. It's inherent. The influence is from within. You are doing these things from within because you've been taught in a way that you want to do these things now. Okay, it's not being forced upon you. It's not something that is being scientifically crafted and programmed into you. It is something that is cultivated in you, nourished in you, something that is naturally and organically implanted in your heart, so that wherever you go, you can go to Las Vegas tomorrow, you'll wear your hijab, right? You'll pray on time, even if you were in a position where nobody prays and you were in the middle of a certain area, nobody's praying, you would pray on time because it's in you. You pray on time, right? But if you were only praying because your mother was there or the police was there, the day you enter a society nobody prays, you're not going to pray. There's no external influence to force you to pray anymore. Right? So rather than imposing external barriers, we need to build internal walls, fortify our hearts. A man who can pray anywhere, there can be women all over the place, he's able to pray because he knows, I have the fortitude within me. An example of this, because I don't want people to hear this later on and say, the brother's talking again. There's no evidence for this. There's a very famous Sahabi, I forget his name, but I'll try and get it and put it in a group, who was captured by the Romans. The Romans captured him, and this was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And he was a Sahabi of Muhammad ﷺ, and the Romans captured him. So the Romans captured him and wanted to extract information from him concerning the Muslim army, concerning Medina, concerning Muhammad ﷺ. So the Roman emperor invited this man and began to offer him things, right? Wealth, influence, and then eventually women. So they sent a woman, a young, beautiful woman, into his cell to entice him. Okay? And this wasn't a woman wearing niqab and hijab. They sent her specifically in a way that was to entice him. He was there by himself. There was no imam there. There was no companion there with him. It was just him in the land of the Romans, in the prison cell, under duress. And they sent him a woman, a beautiful woman. What do you think he did? He began to make dhikr of Allah's name, subhanallah. He began to make dhikr, asma'ullah al-husna. And he says, that fortified me. That man can survive Medina. Even if 1,000,000 women were praying behind him, he could survive. Because he's fortified internally. He survived it, by the way. He came back alive. Yeah? Because he was, the way his tarbiyah in Medina was such that we can send you anywhere. And you would still have integrity. And you will not turn around and say, well, because in Medina we don't look at women. When I'm in the Roman land, I will look at women. That excuse came from somebody else. If you look at the seerah, that excuse came from somebody else. Al-Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam was gathering an army to go and fight the Romans. And it's in Surah At-Tawbah, I believe. It's actually in the Quran. Abdullah, what's the name of the... he refused to go and support the army facing the Romans. Why? What was his excuse? So they called him to join the army to go and fight the Romans. And he made an excuse. What was his excuse? Can anyone remind us? I'm testing your seerah skills here.
I think was it to go and enjoy the beautiful women?
Yes, he said, La taftini, don't make fitna for me, Ya Rasulullah. You know I can't resist blondes. This is what he said. He says, it's a fitna for me to go and see women who don't wear hijab and blondes as well, red hairs. It's a fitna for me to go because fi sabilillah, this is fi sabilillah. We're talking about if you die in this path, you become shaheed. This is a high status. And all you can think of is, I'm going to see blonde-haired women and blue eyes and I have a fitna for that. Huh? It's in the Quran. So his iman was clearly not high enough. Yeah. clearly. All he could see in that situation of desperation was there are going to be women there, blondes. I can't control myself. That's the level between the Sahabi who was captured and his life was in danger, and they tried to bribe him with money and fame and power, and eventually women. And he made dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he never crumbled. He never made an excuse for himself. And somebody who was in Medina who says, well, if I go out of Medina and I go to Damascus, I'm going to see women, blonde-haired women, and I can't resist. I can't help myself. You're gonna put fitna upon me, Ya Rasulullah. His heart wasn't open for that. He wasn't fortified. So he needed to be in Medina because he needed to be controlled. Otherwise, according to his own statement, he couldn't survive outside Medina. It's a weak excuse. So this is what he says here, that the real religion, religious law, Sharia at heart.
Sorry, Ustad.
Yes, Brother Yunus.
Sorry, Ustad. Just what did Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said when the Sahabi said that?
It's an ayah Qur'aniyah. So Allah responds to that. Okay, Allah responds. I'll post inshallah, if I remember, I'll post the ayah. I don't want to misquote it. But Allah responds. Yeah, Allah responds.
Okay, thank you, Ustad.
Yeah. So this is why when we hear, for example, fitna as an excuse, you have to ask yourself, why is it a fitna for you? Is your heart not cultivated to a point where you can resist basic things such as seeing a woman just walking past in a masjid? Yeah? Really, it's a state of your internal level of fortitude. It's not about the woman walking past, it's about you and your reaction to that. Yeah? Another anecdote, I'll stop with the anecdotes, but it's important to give anecdotes here. I think it's from the Buddhist tradition here, of a Buddhist monk traveling with his disciples, and they were on a journey. Along the way, they came across a small stream of water, and there was a young woman who couldn't cross the water because she feared drowning or maybe getting her clothes wet. So she stood by the side of the bank, and she saw the men approaching her. The Buddhist monk spoke to the woman, she explained the situation, so he decided to help her across. So he lifted her in his arms, and his students were aghast. They couldn't believe what was happening. A young, beautiful woman. Here is our sheikh lifting her. What's going on here? They crossed the water. He put her down, gave her some good word of advice, and went on his way. And his companions followed him. 2 days later, they were still a bit uneasy. He could sense in them that something was wrong. There was something not right. So he asked them, what's the matter? And they said to him that what happened 2 days ago has just disturbed us, because we're about abstinence, right? This is the path we're upon, abstinence. We don't interact with women. We don't have these worldly desires. But you lifted the woman in your arms. You carried her across the water. This is against our teachings. So he says, no. The problem is not that I carried her. The problem is you never let her go. The problem is not I carried her. The problem is you're still carrying her. That's the problem. That's what's disturbing you. I let her go on the other side of the river. Khalas is done. I've moved on. You are still carrying her in your heart. And that's the problem. Yeah. Very profound lesson. It's not about the external stimulant. It's about the internal law. Are you abiding with your heart to the law? Or do you need somebody to tell you to do something, or to force you to do something, or to stop you from doing something? And that's a lesser level of, you could say, adherence to the law. So he left. He said, I left her 2 days ago behind. I let her go of her. It was just a transaction. I helped her and that was it. Khalas. You are still carrying her in your heart. That's the problem. So therefore, the governmental and educational laws influence sedentary people in that they weaken their souls and diminish their stamina. Stamina in that you can't resist. So your resistance levels are very low. You don't have strong resilience. You don't have that fortitude. It reduces it because you don't have to exercise anything. It's all done for you. So it says it weakens them. Their souls are weak to temptation. Diminished stamina. Patience that you need won't be there. And they have to suffer their authority both as children and as adults. In other words, because you can't control yourself, well, you have to be controlled. Because you can't self-regulate, You have to be regulated, you see, because the government won't trust you to do the right thing by yourself. And you don't have the ability to do the right thing by yourself, so you have to be controlled like a child. You have to be controlled and governed and uh, surveyed for the rest of your life. And that is not a way that we would like to see society go, that everything has to be monitored, right? In London, I believe London is has the most CCTV cameras in the entire world. Yeah. London has the most CCTV cameras in the entire world. That is not a sign of a civilized society, it's the opposite. Because there are villages in this world that don't have a single camera, but there is less crime and less oppression. Not a single camera in that village, but they have less crime and less oppression. So what does that tell us about cities where you have cameras everywhere? It's a sign that these people need to be monitored. They can't be trusted to do the right thing without being monitored and being policed to such an extent. Yeah. It's a sign of decadence, essentially, because they're used to being effectively controlled that way. So that's very profound of Ibn Khaldun. I do like this statement here. Sayyidina Umar, he wanted everyone to have restraining influence in himself. You don't need a wall. You don't need a wall, akhi. The wall should be in your heart. You don't need a wall to stop you from seeing the sister walking past the masjid. The wall should be internal. That's what we want. And if all of us have such a wall, society will work. We don't need the walls anymore. It will work, right? Likewise, if a man says, if I see money on the floor or if I see money on the table, I have to steal it. I can't control myself. Well, in that case, we're going to have cameras everywhere, because we can't live in a society where if we see money on the table, we take it because we can't control ourselves. That's a society that will require a lot of cameras. But in a society where you can leave your doors open at night, there are many countries where your front door is never locked. I've lived in such countries. Your front door is never locked. It's always open, except for at night time, obviously. You close the doors at night. But in the daytime, it's open, right? In those societies, the environment is safe. They don't have to lock the doors, double lock the doors at all times. The doors are always open. Yeah? That's an environment where you don't need to have a police officer, a CCTV camera. People know that it's a healthy environment and we don't have to worry about people breaking into our houses. But in environments where you have to lock your doors, padlock them, and also have a camera outside the doors, what does that tell you about the society? Tells you a lot. Self-restraint is not there. So self-control is very important. Yeah. There's a famous statement when I was young. I forget who said it, so I won't ascribe it. When I was young, I wanted to change the world. Now that I'm old and wiser, I have decided to change myself. Yeah. Change your own self. Work on your own inner core so that you can survive any environment. Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wasalam, when he was born, he spoke, and Banu Israel came to him. One of his miracles was he spoke as a child. So they question him, who are you? He says, Inni Abdullah, I am Abdullah. آتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا وجعلني مباركا أينما كنت وعصاني بالصلاة وزكاة ما دمت حيا. Subhanallah. I am Abdullah. I'm the slave of Allah. And He's given me the book. I'm a prophet. I'm a messenger. وَجَعَلَنِي مُبَارَكًا أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُ. He's made me blessed and a blessing wherever I am. Subhanallah. Oftentimes, I look at parenting styles, okay, how people parent their children. I'm personally very hands-off. I allow my children to make mistakes, and then I give feedback, and then I give a reason with them. Okay, I speak to them in a way that is, I want to cultivate in you the essence of the law, so that if I'm not around anymore, if I'm not there, you can operate. You don't need me to tell you, do it this way and this way and this way and this way. But I often see parents who do the opposite. You want to rule by the law. Everything is by law. Well, the day you're not there to rule by the law, your child will be left to their own device. How will they be able to operate in the world at that point? The other thing is, you can only control what you teach your child. You can only prepare your child for the world, but you can't prepare the world for your child. If you think you can change the entire world to be safe and to be perfect for your child to enter, you'll be here forever. What you can do, however, you can control what you teach your child, how you raise them, so that they can go anywhere and they can be Mubarak. As Sayyidina Isa says, wherever I go, I am blessed. That's a powerful statement. Wherever I go, I am blessed and I'm a blessing for the people. Doesn't matter if your child lives in Europe or lives in Mecca, whether he lives in Shanghai or whether he lives in Somalia, whether he lives in New York. If you have planted the right seed, they will flourish wherever they go. Wherever they go, they'll be flourishing. And that's where we want to be as parents. At a societal level, it's not about enforcing every single technical law, what I call Islam by technicality. Islam by technicality. Your Islam is mechanical, it's synthetic. You only go by, this scholar said, technically, thus, thus, and thus. And therefore, technically, I don't have to do thus, thus, and thus. That is not the essence of the law. And you are like those people who had to be kept in chains with laws, Banu Israel. Everything was by laws because they couldn't handle the essence of the law. They had to be fettered with laws. Until the end, everything was a law for them. And even then, they were still transgressing against the laws. The heart of the law was not with them. Yeah. Famous quote from Marcus Aurelius, where he says, you have the power over your own mind, not over the outside events. Realize this and you'll find strength. Very famous, Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations. You only have control of your own self and your own mind. Once you realize that, you will find strength. It's about strength here. Ibn Khaldun is talking about strength, resilience, having that fortitude. It's about strength. When you externalize your own weakness upon other people, upon society, and you want to change the society, change the people outside, you don't have time to build yourself. Change really begins when you look at what's weak within yourself internally. You cultivate that. Now you can have, your life is easier because you have the internal fortitude. You can cultivate yourself in a way that you can go anywhere and survive and thrive. It doesn't matter. You can survive and thrive and be a benefit wherever you go. Yeah? So once you realize that you have power only over yourself, your eyes are your eyes. You can look that direction or another direction. It's very easy to not see things. Close your eyes or look the other direction. That's a lot quicker, a lot more effective than policing everyone else around you. Trying to police everyone else around you. That will take a long time because there are no perfect societies. And if you're waiting for that to happen, you'll be here forever. So it's about taking responsibility, cultivating the internal ability for you to operate anywhere. And he mentions about, this is quite funny actually, you don't need to have an opinion about everything. That's true. If a Muslim doesn't pray, it's not your business. If the sister doesn't wear hijab, it's not your business. You don't have to have an opinion about everything. And don't get worked up about things that you can't control. These things didn't ask for your attention. Leave them alone. Subhanallah. How simple is that? Sayyidina Ali said, blessed is the one who minds his own problems and who is so busy counting his own sins, he has no time to count other people's sins. Blessed is the person who is so busy counting his own sins that he has no time to count other people's sins. The essence of work on yourself. I mean, the entire chapter is about working on yourself to the point where you don't need to have somebody to control your actions and to govern over you because you have the internal fortitude to govern yourself and to be anywhere and to survive and thrive. Again, you don't need to have an opinion about everything. Don't get worked up about other things that you can't control. These things, they don't ask for your attention, so leave them alone. Okay? Very simple, very wise advice as well. And finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that tell the believing men to lower their gaze and to preserve their own private parts. That's purer for them. And Allah is aware of what you do. Simple. I mean, this is wonderful advice. Begin that fortification. This is the spirit of the law. This is the spirit of the law. And when this is not grasped by society, the government has to implement external laws. So now they have to have laws to enforce this law. If the people receive this law and abide by it, there's no need to have external laws. But if the people can't abide by this, the spirit of this law, this is when you have to have external laws. This is when you have to have barriers in the masjid. This is when you have to have cameras in the masjid. We have cameras in our masjid now. This is where you have to have somebody guarding the doors in the masjid to make sure that the sisters and the men don't mix. Right? If the spirit is not in place, you have to build a system around it to enforce it. But the essence is, if you could achieve this in the first place, there's no need to build the external edifice to protect your eyesight and your private part, because you are in your own self able to do that. And Allah says that's purer for them. SubhanAllah. Very simple, wise, and amazing. What Ibn Khaldun is describing here is an ideal society. A society, al-Madinat al-Fadila, I forget his name now, SubhanAllah. He wrote the book Al-Madinat al-Fadila, the virtuous city. The name escapes me now. Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi. A city where people do the right thing. They don't have to be forced to do the right thing. Okay? They behave upon the essence of what the law has brought to them, and they don't have to be policed at every step of the way. Anytime I hear somebody blaming the external environment for their own internal failing, it tells me something about that person and how they see the world. Yeah? It tells me about how they see the world. Anytime you blame external environments and influence, instead of looking at your own internal ability to either resist or to change things, it tells us a lot about your outlook on life. Yeah? When Sayyidatna Maryam alayhi salatu wasalam, when the angel came to her, Allah describes in the masjid, in the mihrab, in the inner sanctum of the masjid, the mihrab, he appeared to her and she was secluded in the screen. Allah said, we sent a man. In the appearance of a man was Jibril, but in the appearance of a man, perfect, a wonderful, handsome man. And he just appeared to her. She says, قالت إني أعوذ بالرحمن منك إن كنت تقيا. I seek refuge in the most merciful from you if you have taqwa. In the tafsir, some of them say when Sayyidina Jibril heard that, yeah, he was knocked back physically and he fell out of his form. When she said that word to him, he fell out of his form. He was knocked back physically. That's when he began to explain to her, actually, no, Allah sent me to you with good news, right? It's a powerful moment. Because ideally, again, we're not angels. We are not angels. But ideally, in the ideal Islamic environments, if a sister says to you, A'udhu bi-Rahmani mink in kunta taqiyya, that should be sufficient. That should be sufficient. If the heart is alive and connected, that's sufficient. She doesn't have to carry pepper spray, or she doesn't have to carry anything to defend herself, or to be surrounded by chaperones everywhere. That should be sufficient. Ideally, again, it's idealism. It's not the reality in most places, the idealism. But the point being, we have to reach that level. That's where we want to be reaching, that level. Even the angel fell back. Right? When he heard that, it blew him away. And he lost his form, his disguise. That's how powerful it is. But again, that's a heart that's receptive. The heart is receptive. And that's why it reacted that way. Right, so effectively the proliferation of laws. So again, when we talk of fatwa, when we talk of the qawaid, when we talk about the rules, the books, the mutun, the various laws passed about issues, in a sense, it's development, because you're developing the legal system in Islam, right? These laws become more definite, they become more elaborate. But essentially, it's also a sign of decline. That you have so many laws for so many things, right? Because when the law is taken in its essential form, you don't have to have elaborate laws to explain it, right? When you take it essentially, it's not complicated. It becomes complicated when you make it complicated. So in the example of Sayyidina Musa, as I said before, Banu Israel had the most laws. Their Sharia was the most elaborate because they were the most difficult people to govern. Sayyidina Musa alayhi salatu wasalam in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says, he told his people, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وَإِذْ قَالَ مُوسَى لِقَوْمِهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْبَحُوا بَقَرَةً. He says to his people, Allah has commanded you to sacrifice a heifer. That was the command. That was the command. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تَذْبَحُوا بَقَرَةً. That was it. That was the command. Very simple, straightforward. However, because they were rebellious and the heart wasn't welcoming the Lord, they had to be governed. These are people who had to be governed. They had to be governed. They had to be told exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. Otherwise, they would not do it. They needed to be governed that way. So they began to question and question and question and question until eventually the one line, which was just to sacrifice a cow, became a long list of requirements. The color of the cow, the age of the cow, whether the cow tills the soil or not tills the soil. It became difficult for them because they made it difficult for themselves. The essence was simple to fulfill, but it became a long list of demands later on, a long code, because they made it difficult. Yeah. So these are people who they needed to be guided by laws, strict laws, because in and of themselves, they didn't have the internal mechanism to just obey the law when it was given to them. It's the same thing in a society. If a society needs to have so many laws, everything is legalized, everything is about laws, and you can be sued about it, means the society is dysfunctional. It's a dysfunctional society that needs so many laws to be implemented for things to work. In a healthy society, you don't need to have too many elaborate laws because people are healthy and they can be trusted to do the right thing. With minimal instruction, they'll do the right thing, right? But in this case, as you can see, the laws became elaborate because they were not trustworthy, they were not receptive, and they were not prepared to do the right thing at the first instance. So this is what becomes of a people who need to have stabilizers. So if your deen is simple, if your society is straightforward, but you are not able to operate without stabilizers, so your iman is so fragile, or your consciousness in society is so fragile, that if you don't have stabilizers for your own personal moral compass, you will fail. That's a sign of weakness. Okay, that means you're not ready yet to self-govern or to be left alone to your own devices. This is why, for example, you have, let's say, child abusers. Child abusers. They don't want to be in places where children are playing because, according to them, this is a problem for them to see children playing. It entices them. Yeah? The solution is not to remove children from society. That's not the solution then. If you have a person who says to you that if I see children playing or if I see children, it will entice me, the solution is not to remove children from society. The solution is to fix that person. Something is wrong in that person. Begin working inside. Work within first. Something is wrong with you. It's not the children, it's you. Something's wrong with you. Right? If you want to remove all children from society so that you can operate normally, that's a big problem. That's a big problem. Okay? You need to fix what's not working internally. So if the law is the only thing that keeps a society stable, there is a big problem. There is a big problem. Okay, this is why he's pointing to here that if you need to have stabilizers, there is a massive problem. Okay, if you need to have police to enforce basic laws of Islamic attire, and you think you need to have that, otherwise things will go left, there's a bigger problem at hand here. That's a big problem because there was no police in Medina to police the Sahabiyat. There was no police in Mecca to police the Meccans. They were the best Muslims, and there was no police necessary, because they were built from within, and they can go anywhere and still survive. So the example of somebody who lives in a society where everything is dictated to them, where if they don't have a law in place, they will find themselves unable to control themselves. Ibn Khaldun says they don't have fortitude. They become weak. It's the example of somebody who learns to drive a car in the automatic, so an automatic gear. You learn to drive a car with the automatic. Everything's done for you effectively. When you drive an automatic vehicle, You don't have to find a biting point, right? You don't have to find a biting point because it's automatic. You just put the keys in and just get ready to drive. But the one who drives and learns the manual way, okay, they're able to shift to an automatic vehicle easily, no problem. But the one who learned the automatic way, can they drive a manual car? If suddenly their car crashed and now they had a replacement car, it's manual, can they drive a manual car if they were trained on automatic gears? The answer is no. They have to go and get trained all over again. They need to find new training so they can manage a manual car. Otherwise, they will stall. They won't even be able to move the car. Yeah? So if a Muslim is learning Islam the automatic way, a day may come when you need to use manual gears and you will stall. You will stall. So you won't be able to operate. You won't be able to navigate the landscape. You will stall because you're used to automatic. External stimulants, external protection, external guide. Whereas in reality, you should be working internally to use a manual gear just in case. Yeah.
Yeah, so Ibn Khaldun, even in the earlier chapters, at the beginning of the book, he talks about no human being is independent in terms of the food we get, the clothes that we wear, like even to that level, like
Exactly.
not just the educational level, not the governmental law, even to this level, like everything we do wear, technology, like if all of this went away, if there was a blackout, power outage, how would you create your food? How would you bathe? How would we live if all of this was taken away?
He said exactly. He mentions that even to make bread, he gives a good example. He says, take for example, you have to uh, make your own bread. According to Ibn Khaldun, there's no individual who can do everything. So, for example, you would have to be a farmer. So you'd have to sow the seeds, you have to plant the seed, then you have to harvest the seed, then you have to become somebody who's able to. You have to be a baker. You then need to process the food, right, with a millstone. Then you need to be able to find ingredients for that. So you have to go and get the salt from the sea, the yeast. So you have to go and do so many jobs just to make one loaf of bread. It's not possible. We need one another. So he says you need a society where somebody does the baking, somebody does the farming, somebody does the other transformation processes so that we can all survive together. You are not independent in that sense. You can't even make bread for yourself from start to finish. So he explains it that way. But in this case, he's talking about being overly reliant because he mentions that the Bedouins are more independent. They can survive in the elements, of course, in tribes, but they are not as dependent on the laws and the walls and the regulation as the sedentary people. They're able to survive without being told how to do everything. Yeah, they have that level of fortitude and independence. If you, again, it's in essence how to be a good citizen, how to be a good human being, how to be a good Muslim. What he's arguing here is that if you are waiting to be told how to do everything the right way, if you're waiting to be told that's bad, don't do it, and the only way you will not do it is somebody looks over your shoulder to make sure, then you won't be an effective citizen, right? You rely upon the laws to keep you straight. That's not right. You should be able to self-regulate. If you say if a woman doesn't wear a hijab, for example, then I'm going to be enticed. That's a problem. That's a problem. That's a major problem because you should be in a position where even if there is no hijab, there's not, and it's just as we see in, if you live in the West, we see it every single day. You should be able to control yourself. You should have internal fortitude to control yourself because that's what being Muslim is about, right? You regulate yourself wherever you are. But if you're used to somebody looking after you and making sure that things don't appear to you, and because they put a barrier here so you don't get to see the women, you become too dependent on that. And the day you have to ride a manual car, you will stall. You won't go anywhere. You'll be stuck in the desert. Yeah. So this brings us now to the essence here, which is ihsan, perfection, excellent. Okay, that you worship Allah because Allah is worshipped, but not just anyhow. There are laws for how to worship Allah. It's not just you worship Allah how you like. There are laws, there are rituals you have to follow. But to perfect the worship of Allah is when you go to the point where you do the right things and you perfect your ibadah because you're in a state of ihsan. You don't have to be monitored. You don't have to be policed. You don't have to be instructed. You've come to the point where you have reached a level of perfection where you do it because it's the right thing to do. An example of this is when Sayyidina Musa, again, alayhi salatu wasalam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had ordered him to go to the mountain. And Sayyidina Musa was to take, I believe, 40 elders from Banu Israel to accompany him to the mountain. Initially, they were supposed to meet in the same place as Sayyidina Musa. So if they had followed their prophets in spirit, they would have been on the top of the mountain when Allah spoke to Musa. Imagine that maqam. But they were not people who took, they had to be forced to do things. They had to be forced to comply. So when they got to the middle of the mountain, they decided to stop there and they refused to continue going up. They got tired and said, I'm not going to go up anymore. They stopped where they were and wrote their own books. They wrote their own books when they stopped there. So when Sayyidina Musa arrived, he arrived early. Allah says he arrived early. The time was appointed, but he arrived early. Allah questions him, says, Ya Musa, why did you hurry? Your people are still behind you, way behind. You got here early. Why? Sayyidina Musa says, I have come early litarda, so you can be pleased. This is ihsan. I arrived at the meeting place, but I came early, so you can be pleased. This is ihsan. Allah didn't say to him, come early. It was sufficient that he knew that Allah wants me in this place. So not only am I going to be there, I'm going to be there early. litarda. I want you to be pleased, Ya Allah. So the law, as we say, not everything that should be said has to be said. Sometimes the fuqaha, they mention al-ishara. Al-ishara means what? Ishara, it means a directive. It's a directive. If you look at legal theory and legal code, when you receive a directive, that's not the law. A directive is a general consensus, so this will happen. How you implement the law becomes the law. You can have codes below the directive. The directive could be, for example, no one is allowed to eat after 9 o'clock. That's a directive, a general law. A specific law would be you're not allowed to eat fast food after 9 o'clock on a Monday evening. And then you repeat that for every potential scenario. So now you have a long list of rules. You can't eat pizza, you can't eat burgers, you can't eat ice cream, you can't eat this, you can't eat that on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. This is for people who need to be told exactly what to do and when to do it. And if they find a loophole, they'll exploit it. But there are people you tell them you can't eat after 9 p.m. That's enough. You don't have to tell them Monday, Tuesday, on holidays, on weekends. They understand it. That's enough. You don't have to explain rice, bread. They understand. I will abstain from 9 p.m. of all food. Khalas, they've understood it. Right? This is ihsan. Not only that, but they will say to you, okay, fine. I don't eat after 9 p.m. I'll even stop at 8:45. I'll stop at 8:45 because I know you want this from me. I'll do better than that. Ihsan. Yeah. So when the laws arrive, you have two options. You can be of the people who says, well, I need to be told specifically, and there has to be punishment, and there has to be monitoring, and there has to be an extensive amount of technical clauses for me to obey this law. Or somebody who says, I understand the spirit of the law, and I'm going to fulfill it to the best of my ability. Ihsan. So Musa arrived early, and he said to Allah, litarda, so you can be pleased with me. Meanwhile, his people came, they left behind. They were not people who were their heart wasn't in it. So they didn't fulfill the law. Even the basic law, they didn't fulfill it. Yeah. So this is the essence of what he's saying here is that in this ideal society, we operate upon ihsan. Okay? People operate with ihsan. So that means you don't have to worry about another person's intention. You know that this person can travel freely and they won't be molested. They won't be abused. You can trust the person of authority because they have integrity. They don't have to be told that there's a policy in the masjid that you can't molest children. Na'udhu billah. Unfortunately, we've come to the point where this is becoming a policy requirement in masajid. They have anti-molestation orders or rules, part of the policy is that we have to have this in place, safeguarding, safekeeping. Right? I know because I know a family member who has to teach this to people. Safekeeping, safeguarding. Imagine in a masjid. Why would we need that in any situation? Because unfortunately, some people need to be monitored that way so that they don't cause harm to others. They have to be monitored that way. But essentially, we shouldn't have to have these because, essentially speaking, it's common sense. You don't do that. It should be common sense, but it's not common sense. And so, when you reach the level of ihsan, Ibn Khaldun says you don't have to be monitored and forced because you have internal fortitude. Okay? All right. So, when we reach a level, however, the opposite, where you have to be monitored, we reach what we know as the Kafkaesque and kind of phenomena. Kafka was a very famous Austrian Jewish author and thinker, and he wrote many books. But some of his books talk about, for example, being caught up in the system. Okay, having the system always monitoring you, always kind of keeping tabs on you. You're almost like in a maze, in a labyrinth. You're stuck, constantly being monitored, being surveilled. You don't have freedom to act upon your own. So when we hear of these sorts of things, we describe them as Kafkaesque. A Kafkaesque situation is one whereby the individual has no freedom. They're constantly being monitored, constantly being surveilled, constantly being investigated. Okay? And they feel as if they're being restricted. They don't have freedom. Okay? We don't want to live in a society that's Kafkaesque, where unless we are being told not to do bad things, we will do bad things. Or unless there's a clear-cut law to tell us you can't do this, we won't do this. We want to live in a society where common sense and decency is sufficient, and the natural disposition of a good human being, that when you hear the law, you understand it. You don't have to have specifics. The Prophet ﷺ, he didn't like specifics when it came to laws. For example, in his final Hajj, Hajjatul Wada, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said to the people, خُذُوا مَنَاسِكَكُم مِّنِّي خُذُوا مَنَاسِكَكُم مِّنِّي. Take your rituals from me. In other words, observe what I do and perform Hajj this way going forward. Okay? Pay attention and learn from me. So he told the people about the obligation of Hajj. It was a pillar of Islam. And one companion said, Ya Rasulullah, every year, should we do this every year? Should we make Hajj every year? And he became upset, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He became upset. Okay. Now, it's not a bad thing to want to do Hajj every year. It's not a bad thing. Okay. Why was the Prophet upset? He was upset because he said to the man, if I say yes to that, if I answer your question and say yes every year, you will not be able to fulfill that going forward. It'll be a great burden for people. And now you'll be sinful for not doing so. Okay? If I give you a command, take it. Don't ask more questions. Don't make it difficult. Take the general command, and with ihsan, do your best, but don't make it difficult by demanding more and more and more specificity to the point where it becomes difficult now and you can't fulfill it. Okay. So he wasn't happy with that question. It made it difficult for people. Okay? Let it be simple in general, and in your own individual capacity, you can do more. You can always do more. As an individual, you can strive for ihsan. But if you insist on having so many laws to govern everything and you have to have it written down, you make life difficult not only for yourself, for everyone else. And the ideal society, and it's a microcosm, the ideal individual doesn't need to be governed every step of the way. You don't have to be monitored every step of the way. You need to have internal mechanisms that will enable you to act accordingly, whether or not people are there to monitor you. You can act accordingly. So we've come to the end of this section. I will again reiterate the final analogy. I think it will kind of wrap it up very well. When you grow plants in a laboratory or in a green or in an environment that's heavily controlled, everything is monitored, everything is regulated. Okay, humidity, light intensity, temperature, the water, everything is scientifically measured and controlled. Of course, the flowers look healthy. Okay, they're going to produce, they're going to grow. But if you remove them from the environment, what happens? They can't survive. You've taken away the natural elements that they need to survive in the natural world. Whereas And this would be, in modern terms, a masjid that has to have cameras everywhere, that has to have barriers and security guards everywhere, subhanallah, okay? Because you need to have people to monitor. Otherwise, you fear that something bad could happen in a masjid. That's a condition that has to be addressed. What is it about that masjid that can't cultivate people who will operate without having to be told not to do certain things? Okay? So, for example, ideally, again, it's ideal, ideally speaking, if we have a charity box in a masjid, it shouldn't have to be in a safe. It shouldn't have to be locked in metal cases. It should be possible to have an open bucket. People just drop the money there and leave. Ideally, again, we're not living in an ideal world, but ideally, that would be the case. But we find, at least where I frequent, massive metal safe, like massive metal safes for charity. So that tells you that there is a lack of integrity, at least a lack of confidence in the integrity of people who come there. Or you have cameras where the shoes are being stored. Why? Why do we need cameras in the entrance where the shoes are? Because we know certain people steal shoes. So again, we need to cultivate, not just the camera doesn't fix it, it's only a symptom. What needs to be fixed is the heart of those who enter those masjids, for example. To the contrary, however, a flower or a plant that grows in natural environments, yes, it's more difficult, okay, because there is the weather, sometimes there's not enough water, sometimes the wind is blowing too harsh. But guess what? That seed becomes a lot more resilient, a lot stronger in the long term, because it's been able to weather the elements in a natural setting. Those who prayed in this masjid, you can see no barriers. It's a representation of the original masjid in Medina. There was no barrier. Women prayed here, men prayed here. Okay, there was no barrier. These were the human beings who conquered the world and brought Islam to us. They were the greatest Muslims in the history of mankind, the greatest people. But look at their training camp. Look at this university. If there was ever a university, this would have been it. Look at how open and simple it was. Very simple. There was no camera necessary. There were no security guards necessary. There was no metal or wooden or brick wall necessary. Okay, they had discipline, but more importantly, they had internal fortitude. That's why Ibn Khaldun says in that day and age, they didn't need too many laws. They didn't have to be told things 100 times to understand it. Sami'na wa ta'na, that was it. And they did the best possible, the best they can do to obey. There was an example of a companion who he was walking to the masjid. So he was a bit late for Salah, and this was around midday, Dhuhr time. He was a bit late. And so as he was walking to the entrance, he could hear the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling the people to sit down. So as a man is walking towards the masjid, he heard the command from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, "Sit down," to the congregation. So they sat down. When he heard that command, he sat down. So although he wasn't yet in the masjid, he was outside the masjid. As soon as he heard the command, sit down, he sat down. So he missed essentially a place within the masjid. And later on, the Prophet ﷺ, he walked out the masjid when the sermon was over, and he found the man sitting down. Said to him, "What? You're sitting down under the hot sun. No protect. Why are you here sitting here?" He said, "Because I heard you command us to sit down. I sat down." Simple, very simple. He didn't start questioning. And now, technically, of course, he was allowed to walk to the masjid and sit down. But the point being, they took it so, they were so naturally obedient and open-hearted that as soon as they heard something, they did it. They didn't argue or look for technical loopholes here and there. They understood the essence and they did it. So that's why their slogan was, "Sami'na wa ta'na." We have heard and we have obeyed. We have heard and we have obeyed. They didn't discuss and debate and argue and find technicalities. They have heard and they obeyed. Yeah. And that was a natural setting. So naturally, those people, when they were then graduated from this masjid, and they traveled to Egypt, to Syria, they went as far as China and India, they went to Constantinople, they were able to conquer those people, not only physically, but also in terms of spiritually and socially. They came with something of substance. Substance. So they were good representatives of the education, tarbiyah they received here. So this is where we want to be essentially as a society, as individuals, natural growth, internal growth, that as Sayyidina Isa says, wherever I go, I am blessed. It's not an environmental thing. I can go anywhere and still flourish and thrive and be a source of benefit. I don't need to be monitored everywhere I go and have a tag on me so that I can be monitored. No, I can operate freely, but also virtuously. I don't need synthetic props and synthetic environments to be a good Muslim. It's easy to be a good Muslim if you live in an environment where everything is being controlled by the government, the dress code, when people pray, how people pray. It's easy to be a good Muslim because it's all synthetic. Okay. But when you leave that environment and enter the natural world, that's when the real essence of your Iman comes into play, or the real essence of an individual. When you live in a society where everything's monitored and you go to a society where it's open, your honesty becomes clear because now you can honestly, you'll be an honest person at heart wherever you go. You'll be a thief at heart wherever you go. The only difference is opportunity. Is there a camera there to watch me or not? That's the only difference. So rather than changing the society or the environment, we need to change what's internal to us. Yeah? And that's, I think, the greatest takeaway from this. And I found this chapter very enlightening. I think it was very, very um, powerful that Ibn Khaldun would actually advocate for what Sayyidina Umar also advocated, which is have internal restraint. The problems that bother you so much and that waste so much time elaborating upon, arguing upon, can be very easily overcome if you just took the basic advice. What can you control? How can you influence your own, first of all, your own self? And do these things actually bother you and why? And if so, you can easily just turn away, find something else to do. Okay? Because they never ask for your attention. They never ask for your attention or your advice. Consider what you can do within yourself and work off that, inshallah. Let's take 10 minutes before we wrap up. Any questions, any commentary before we call it a day, inshallah?
So basically, the more institutionalized something becomes, the less productive it'll be. People can be.
I like that word, institutionalized. I like that word, actually.
Because
That's
what
really
I'm
nice.
understanding is that as Islam became institutionalized through fuqaha, scholars, madahib, people started becoming more, oh, what does this say? What does that say? What
Exactly. Hair
I need to go
splitting.
here, go there. And it's like how we look in our phones for many different fatawa, like day by day for everything.
Brilliant. I
And
like that word. I
use
like
it,
that word.
we use it to control things like, and unfortunately, sometimes we might even oppress our own family with it.
Wonderful word. I like that word, institutionalized. It sums it up perfectly, actually. Perfectly. Sums it up perfectly. This is why, again,
And
yeah, go ahead.
also with in many countries around the world, you notice that the khutbah can be the same from north to south. It's an institutionalized khutbah for Jummah.
Yes.
And is that a form of control as well? Because they know that, we can use the deen to manipulate. It's a sign of a weak government then, because they don't want any opposition. They don't want any motivation for rebellion. So is this the reason why many khutbahs in many countries are the same? There's reading off the paper. Is that another form of
I don't see any other
weak
reason
state
for it.
control?
I don't see any other reason for it. You know, there's a very famous sheikh from a certain country some years ago, not long ago, but some years ago, who, believe it or not, went to France. He's from a very, very conservative Muslim nation. He went to France for medical treatment. Okay. And when he went to France during his stay for medical treatment, he was invited to give lectures, to give khutbah, and he had the opportunity to do that. Now, when he was leaving France, he made dua for France. Could you believe that? We're talking France here. We're talking France. And the reason why he made dua for France, he said, because he wasn't used to giving khutbah and looking at the door and there's no police officer or a guard monitoring the khutbah. He couldn't believe that Muslims were able to give open lectures and to speak free like that. And even the khutbah wasn't being monitored. Yeah. The opportunity there was something that was strange to him. Because he was, as you mentioned, very used to, if I'm giving khutbah, it has to be signed and stamped and sealed. And there is somebody monitoring anyway, if I'm giving the khutbah in the way that it was written down. I don't go left and right. Yeah. So that, again, is an environment where there's an incubator system. It's an incubator system because everything is in a certain space. But if you enter a natural state where you can speak within reason, of course, I mean, within reason, right? The message is more potent. It's a potent message because people can reach the message. Okay, this is a natural, it's like an authentic lecture given by this man, what he really thinks or what he really wants to convey to us, not what was written down for him to tell us. And we know it's written down for him and that he has to go by word for word. Yeah, so that's an example. Yes, it is an example, actually, whereby those scholars then can't speak freely. See, they can't express themselves freely. And then we complain as to why they don't speak up against the rulers. Well, look at the environment they're in. They're in an incubator. So how do you expect them to have that fortitude to speak out the way you want them to speak out? Okay? The system is such that they are in that institution and they have to operate in a way that they can survive in that institution. It's not something that is internal. It's just that's the situation they're in. So yes, it is an example of that. There are many other examples of that. People oftentimes who work in the hotel industry and the tourist industry will tell you. People who work in, for example, in airports, plane crew, or hotel host will tell you. Okay, we see transformations when people come, when they arrive in our country, or when they arrive and when they go back home. Like people change. This was before, of course. Now the world is open, but those transformations were noticed. People noticed it. Yeah. So what changed? It wasn't the uniform, it was the person left one region where things were a certain way, and they entered another region where things are a certain way, and there was no consistency. They became somebody else. Yeah. So that means the training was artificial, it wasn't natural, it wasn't organic. Yeah. We want
Yeah,
to get to a
because you do
point where, yeah.
notice, yeah, I'm traveling like many of the diaspora population. You notice them taking off their earrings, covering up their tattoos, and a lot of these when they travel into their original country. Like when you're transiting, you see this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to come out of a, let's say, a liberal society to enter a conservative society. I understand that because, for example, people may wear hijab while they make an umrah. So for the entire period, they will wear hijab for the first time in their lives. For the entire period, when they're in Mecca, Medina, they decide to wear hijab. It's okay. It's because the environment demands that. That's understandable. You enter somebody's house, you may have to take your shoes off. What is not understandable is that in your house, you wear the khimar and the niqab and the hijab. And when you leave your house, you take it off. That's the problem. Uh, from personal no experience because I'm not a sister, but what we know of the reality in the West, there are many young women, young girls who wear hijab at home, and on their way to school, university, they take it off. They have another uniform in their bag, they take it off and they wear that while they're outside the house. When they come home, they put it back on. Is that conducive? Is that going to help that woman navigate later on in life when she becomes independent? No. She's only doing it now because it's enforced in a way that she doesn't see the benefit of it. It's not in her heart. So while she's with the parents, yeah, she wear the hijab. But as soon as she turns a corner, she takes it off. What use is that? What's the benefit in that? Right? It doesn't have a long lasting. She doesn't have the internal, um, you could say, the internal fortitude to actually do it for the right reasons. Even if the parents are not there anymore, she can continue that. Yeah. But that's what happens when it's enforced rather than cultivated on the people.
But I think in the West that we tend to, let's see, make the hijab more. Of course, it is part of the deen, but we make it more than it is. You understand what I'm saying? Because in the Muslim world, you notice wearing the hijab is just a natural thing for majority of the women. I think, particularly in the Arab world, like it's just natural. It might be not a pious woman, but majority of women just wear the hijab because it's just natural. It's just natural over there.
I mean, if I can jump in, Ustad, Just
Of course you
to make the link between what you said and what the brother just said, I think we are like talking about cultural Muslims. So they are like Muslims who do that just because they think like it's a part of their culture, and so they have to respect that. And as someone who is born like in a Muslim country, who lived like in the West and in a Muslim country, for example, to take what the brother said, yes, they like girls may like wear the hijab, but as you can see, like in the modern world, they put it, but they do it with the jinn, or like uh, it's not an Islamic, like type of wearing, if you know what I mean. Like they will put hijab, but if you see like what is like the whole body, you can't really see, you can't really say that she understands like the spirit of the law, like we just said. So it's really like it's that it's not like done like for Islamic reasons, but it's like it's more like cultural reasons. Just
Yeah, it's
like
cultural.
Ustad said, yeah, it's not laws, but it's like social norms, let's say. So
But
For example, there's many people like it can go even further than that. I see many they wear the proper hijab, like what we think of as the perfect hijab, but these women don't pray or they're not. They just wear it because it's part
yes,
of the society that they're in, not because they don't pray. They and
yes,
many
exactly,
people.
brother.
Same with
And
Ramadan. Same with
yeah,
Ramadan as well. Like everyone
I
gets more religious in
exact
Ramadan.
exactly. I wanted to talk about that. So to not just to talk about like girls, but also about boys. It's like Ramadan. Ramadan here. I mean, in Muslim countries, lots of let's say cultural Muslims just do it like for the social like behavior, not to be judged, and it's just like part of being like in the country. So even if they do it, the in the evening they will do some things that are really bad, like you normally can't do, or even during the day they won't really, they may not eat, but they will do like a lot of things that normally would break the fast. So it's really done like for the social pressure behind it, or the law, like the Ustad say, in some way.
I mean, it's as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in relation to the women wearing hijab and covering themselves, and also men and women dressing properly. Allah says, at the end of all of that, He says, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. The cloth of piety, that's better. Okay, that's not to say that we don't cover up. I don't advocate for that. I think hijab is mandatory. Let me make that very clear. I believe hijab is mandatory. However, Allah says, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. That you cloak yourself in taqwa. That is more important. And that's better. Because you can cover yourself and do bad things. It's possible. But the spirit of the law, again, is that you do it with taqwa, you do it with good intention, you do it with fear of Allah. That is the essence
Yes.
that Allah wants, yeah. It's not just you cover yourself and then you do whatever you like. No. That you do it, but also, essentially speaking, you're not missing the spirit of the law. I mean, this is the thing. Somebody who is taught to be a good citizen because they don't want to end up in jail or because they don't want to end up in problem with the police, and they're only doing it because there's a police officer there, there's a camera there, I could get caught here. Let's say you're driving down the road. We all know when we're driving down the motorway where the cameras are. Okay, so we know where the cameras are. We will stop and drive properly when we see the cameras because, oh, there's a camera there. Or there's a police car. We will drive properly. But when there are no cameras, no police cars, a good driver will still drive properly, regardless. You can be in the middle of nowhere, you will drive properly. But if you are only driving properly because of the camera and the police and the cop car, then when there are no cameras, no police cars, what will be of you driving, right? You will take advantage of that. So when you're driving, metaphorically speaking, whether or not there's a camera in a police car, a good person, regardless of the environment, will still be a good person. A good person, regardless of the government, as Ibn Khaldun began by telling us about government, you will still be a good person because it's innate, it's inherent in you. And the religion then becomes an amplifier for you. What is good becomes better, becomes more beautiful. Ahsan, right? You don't need religion to make you a good person, as some people say, but it definitely makes you a better person. It makes you a better person. The Prophet ﷺ said that those who before Islam were good become better when they become Muslim. So it amplifies. Right? But if you need to be constantly reminded of the punishment, of the sins, of the penalties, so that you can stop doing bad things, then, or you have to be monitored, or you have to be physically restrained, that's a problem. You need to have better internal guidance, better internal, you could say, resilience and self-control, restraint, as he mentions.
Ustad, on the other side, uh, if, like living in the West with so many facade around, uh, sometimes when you isolate yourself, you grow stronger. And once you're in society, in the Western society, your demand kind of decreases. So in the other way, to incubate yourself, you kind of protect your iman.
Let me give you an example. I'll give you an example. These are all anecdotes from, famous anecdotes. It's nothing original here, but it helps. There was a man who saw a moth going through metamorphosis. So the moth goes through various stages, right? It initially becomes it's a slug, then it ends up being a moth and a caterpillar, and then eventually gets into a cocoon. And then when the cocoon is cracked, it becomes a butterfly. So he observed the changes. And he observed the hardest and most difficult time was when the moth became a cocoon, right? And it was a hard shell around it. It protected itself for a long time. And then eventually he saw that it began to crack the shell and squeeze out of the shell. Being a kind man, being a generous man, being somebody who wanted to help the poor insect, he tried to help it by cracking the cocoon with his hands. What do you think happened when he did that?
It died.
It died. Why did it die?
It didn't grow the enough strength to really expand the wings.
Partially, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I mean, فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. He describes how he created, he praises himself. فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. Subhanallah. Allah designed it such that that moth, in order for it to be proportionate, so the fluid in that moth to flow through all the various parts of his body, it has to squeeze out of the shell. And that helps the fluids flow across all the body. Then it becomes a beautiful butterfly, proportionate. When he cracked that shell, he deformed the moth. It became deformed. And of course it died, because now it's deformed, it can't fly, it dies. What does that tell us? Sometimes it's necessary to face the elements so you can grow proportionately. If you're constantly being cocooned and artificially cocooned and artificially assisted, you won't have proportionality. You won't be proportional. Your proportionate reaction to things will not be, it will be disproportionate effectively. Yeah? Of course, certainly, I mean, I'm not saying we don't protect ourselves. We have to. We do it every day. We do it every day in where we go, who we frequent, who do we keep as friends, where do we send our children to learn, how do we live our lives. We have to. That's absolutely mandatory. What I'm saying is, when it is done in a way that is effectively cutting you off completely. And
Oh
we
yeah.
know. Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu said very famously, a group that is pure, I need to get the exact Arabic quote, I don't want to misquote, but it says a group that is pure, yeah, compared to a group that that is not pure but a bit impure. Which one is better? A group that is completely pure and a group that has a bit of blemish. Which of these groups is better?
The
Pure
second
group.
one.
No, the second one is
The
better.
second one.
Yes. And our Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, a man who lives in the mountains and is worshipping Allah by himself, and a man who mixes with the people and he is harmed by them, which one is better?
The second one again.
Yeah, the second one again.
Second one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hiding in
Ustad,
the mountains. Hiding in the mountains is a good strategy for not having any problems, not facing any difficulty in society. But
Yeah.
Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said no. That you come down to society, you mix with people, and you suffer some of the consequences. That is better. And when he said, no, Ali radiallahu anhu said that, he was talking about the Khawarij. They were locked away in their own society, and they had no blemish in the sense that they didn't commit the sins that the ordinary Muslims committed. Of course, they committed greater sins eventually, but their standard was so high compared to the average Muslim, right? Our Rasul said, if you see these people, when they come, Dhul Khawaisira came. He says, Ya Rasulullah, he said, Ya Muhammad, fear Allah, ittaqillah. Right? We know the story. When he went, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, his children, or those who come of him, ideologically speaking, if you see how they pray, if you see how they recite Quran, you would consider yourself nothing compared to them. But who's the better group? Yeah? So I'm not saying we don't protect ourselves. What I'm saying is that cocoon environment, that artificial environment is harmful.
yes. Ustad, what I mean is, let's say, to be strong. Let's say, even when Ibn Khaldun was writing his book, he went into solitary to get strong, to really, let's say, like a training camp, what boxers do. 3 months, pure training, you get strong. Then you come back to the society. But let's say you live in a sedentary society continuously. If the facade and everything around you, I mean, your iman goes down. So, like, continuously, you need to this to go like to isolate yourself, grow your iman, and then come back to society. But if you just live in like in a city or something, you will definitely go down.
Uh,
If I if I can
yeah,
say something about that,
of
Ustad,
course you can. Of
I
course you can.
think I mean I don't want to like to be contrarian and say like the opposite thing, but I think the contrary. Sometimes like it can like strengthen the iman if you try to see if you try to see the wisdom behind our deen, even if you when you are exposed to some facade, when you see some things in these types of societies. So yeah.
You know the Bedouins, when they became Muslim, they were commanded to leave the Bedouin environment and to come to the city. Did you know that?
Uh,
No, I
Yeah.
didn't.
Especially in the time of Sayyidina Umar, they were forbidden. If you became a Muslim and you were Bedouin, you had to leave the Bedouin environment and come to the city.
why?
It's
You
the
can't
first
isolate
time
yourself.
I heard
You
that.
can't isolate yourself from the Jama'ah. One of the conditions for them was once they become Muslim, they have to come to the city. Or they have to move in with the Jama'ah. They couldn't just live where they used to live before, which was in the external outside. They have to come into the city. Yeah. So there are benefits. I understand, yes, you want to maybe, but you can do that. You can create an environment where you have filters. You create filters for yourself, for your family. This is necessary. We should
Yeah.
always be doing that. Yeah, filters. But the problem is if you cut yourself off
Oh yeah,
openly,
yeah. I get you.
that causes problems.
Yeah.
I think it can work in another way, not like in that way, but it could work if you do isolate yourself and go live in like a mountain and self-produce yourself. It can make you appreciate things more and you'll be more thankful for the risk that you get. It can work for that way. But in terms of interaction and being street smart, I think it has a counterproductive.
Yeah, not too extremes, but uh, let's say training camps, just like boxers do, 3 months or a month, or not continuous exposure to city stuff.
Let me ask
Uh,
you a question. Let me ask you a question as a group, yeah? To be let's say somebody wants to cultivate courage, shuja'a, to be courageous as a Muslim, okay? to have the courage to stand as a Muslim and to say, I am a Muslim, to be seen as a Muslim in society. I'll take a Muslim from, let's say, let's not pick a country that will cause problems. Let's say a Muslim from Indonesia who wears a hijab, mashallah, and a Muslim from New York who wears a hijab. And I'm going to take these two Muslims and send them to, let's say, I don't know, Switzerland. Which of these two is going to be most equipped to survive in that environment
New
as a
York.
muhajjaba?
The New
It's New
Yorker.
York, of
Yeah,
course.
why? Why?
She's
She's
already
already
exposed to the
accustomed to
Western.
secular lifestyle.
Yeah. She already knows. She's already experienced. She's been weathered. Right? She knows what it feels like to be a minority, number one. She knows what it feels like to be in a position where the majority don't wear hijab, don't respect hijab, and you're still wearing hijab. She's more equipped for that tribulation. It is a tribulation. Then somebody who comes from an environment where it's healthy, everyone wears hijab, it's normal. Or when you move them out of that environment, the one who survives easier is the one who had to go through that, the preparation stage of mixing in that environment. It's just a reality. When you're moved away from, this is why, for example, you find there are many Muslims who come from the Muslim world. They come to Europe or America to study at university and they become more religious. Why? You come from the Muslim world. You became more religious. Hey, why? Because for the first time, they've experienced what it means to be a Muslim in an environment where being a Muslim is not normal. So they've developed a new muscle. They've developed a new connection to their iman, to their religious identity. So when they come to the West, they become more religious. Yeah. Sister Hafsa.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah for giving me the opportunity. Yeah, I think what brother mentioned, the isolation thing, I think there are two aspects to this. What I believe, from the seerah, what we can see, there is a point of seclusion that's, I think, quite. Sometimes it's just natural to your development as a human being, and that's one of the sunnah of our prophets. When you're reflecting on yourself, it just naturally comes to you when you find yourself isolated. It's not out of choice that you do it, because and that's the second aspect, that Islam is a very congregational religion of Jama'ah, and it's discouraged over and over to break away from Jama'ah, to be secluded, to leave the, we now, because we hear this all the time, that it's fitna, we need to go to the mountains, we need to, it's just too promoted, and it's just like, the beautiful concept you discussed today is just the wall has to be within you, and that's the essence of it all, that we need to build those, barriers actually inside of us, and to be able to fight, live in the dirty place and still learn to fight and to swim in that, the dirty pond, and build that resilience and all that. So I think it's important to look at both ways. Sometimes the seclusion just comes and you discover your own self. I mean, sometimes this isolation is necessary, but you do not isolate yourself over and over or by choice, because I think it's a hadith, it's a riwayah that, I'm sure pretty all of you know this, that there was people in, I think it's with the people of Lut alayhi salam, and they were very pious people, and when Allah sent the azab, the angels said that they're very pious people. They were like the monks. They were used to be always praying, always, and they were confined to their monasteries and their houses, and they were always worshipping Allah, and they were not committing any crime. So the angel said, how do we hit them? So Allah said, hit them first, start with them, because they did not stop the others. So so it's I think Dr. Isra used to mention this all the time, this riwayah, and it's a big responsibility when you're Muslim. It's, you start with yourself and you work on the society as well. So I think it's yeah, that was from me.
Okay, that's wonderful. I really like the contribution. Thank you both. The question then is how, so let's say Muslims live in a society that's not perfect, and no society is perfect on the face of this earth right now. What is the solution then? Do we create communities that are isolated? Do we find a way to kind of build, how do you say, to shelter ourselves from the societal influence at large? Or do we insist on more laws? So, for example, Do we insist that we have, for example, the masjid, more laws, there are more barriers, there are more guards, there are more? Is that the solution, or is it the solution that we go back to the essence of the law to say, actually, what does Islam want from us in this situation? And how do we, even though the world is not perfect, how do we cultivate Muslims for the next generation who can still be effective in this imperfect world, wherever they go, rather than sheltering them and covering them and building walls around them in a world that effectively is not perfect? Yeah.
So can I add something? Maybe it will be a little bit controversial,
Bismillah,
but
Bismillah.
in this very idea you are saying. So I think that for me the solution it's like to put back like the Quran, which is like the words of God subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the middle and in the core of all our lives, you know, and all of fuqaha and all of Jumu'ah speeches. And yeah, it should really be like the center of everything. And what I came to realize, everything is about hadith. It's not that I don't accept hadith. No, I recon like the place it has to play like in our deen, but it feels like today that everything is hadith. It's like يا ربي تسمح لي may God forgive me, but it feels like it has become like more important than the words of God. It's like we are what Ibn Khaldun is saying, I guess. It's this
Institution, yeah, yeah.
yeah, institutionalization of this, you know, it has been done like around that. So, and personally, I think that the medicine for this, it would be like to come back to the original message. It's and we have a hadith about that. I mean, when some people, I think, went to Ummuna Aisha radiyallahu anha, and they asked her about some things. Even the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they just told them like to come back to some surahs or some things like that. But we are not doing this anymore. It's just fatwa after fatwa after fatwa after fatwa, which is yeah, I guess
It becomes
that's
mechanical. It becomes
yeah,
mechanical.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
So I'll give an example. Maybe 3 weeks ago, I was invited on a podcast to talk about marriage. Okay, secret marriages, second wives. It was quite an interesting podcast because the brothers asked me about the technicality of certain marriage forms, right? That if you marry a woman technically, a second woman secretly, you don't tell your first wife about it. Technically, it's okay. Technically, it's okay. Of course, technically, it's okay. But ethically speaking, is it okay for a Muslim to marry secretly and not tell his first wife and hide the second wife? And on top of that, to have a temporary marriage. Technically, it's okay. Technically. But ethically, is it okay? Is that what the institution was for? I don't think so.
No.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
institution was not for that.
sorry, I usually say to, when this is brought up, I usually say to people that why would you do something that you want to keep so secret? Do you think that's to begin with, that in your eyes it's wrong? I mean, you're not brave enough to bring it to light, to public. I mean, why would you do such a thing?
But technically, I'm going to play the
Yeah,
devil's advocate.
yeah,
Technically, sister, I don't have to tell. Technically, I don't have to
yeah,
tell.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So the technically, Islam is a form of over institutionalizing the whole thing. So you lose the spirit. Right? So we now have people who take the hadith like weapons, and they will say technically, this hadith I don't have to tell my wife. Technically, if I don't say I want to divorce after 3 months, if I don't say it, I can have the intention, but if I don't say it, it's okay. It's not mut'ah. This is technical Islam, and you take away the essence. You take away the essence. So now you're playing a game of technicalities, right? So you become like Banu Israel,
Exactly.
technicalities.
That's, yeah.
Yeah. So that's why it's dangerous when it becomes so technically. What about the essence of it? What's the essence? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. That's the essence, right? And that you have long-term, fruitful relationships and you protect. That's the essence. Allah doesn't have to tell you that. Do you need to have a law to tell you the basic things about being a decent human being? That you have to be honest with your intentions before you marry. You don't need. It shouldn't be spelled out, but unfortunately, we've come to the point where it has to be for some people. Unless it's spelled out, they consider it technically okay. Yeah? That's an example of too many rules, too many technical points, destroys the essence altogether. And that's a loophole that's being exploited right now, where people believe it's okay if I don't say I want a divorce after 2 months. So while I'm marrying, in my mind, it's only temporary. But if I say it, it's more. If I don't say it, it's okay. Subhanallah, you lost the essence now. You're playing around with technicalities. So we don't end up in that position where the ahadith are being mentioned or the Quran itself is being mentioned, but like the Khawarij, kalimatun haqq urid bihal batil. You're using the text, but in reality, you're actually circumventing the essence of the law. That's what happens when everything is legally binding and everything is technical and mechanical. You lose the essence. This is why, for example, we hear all types of weird behavior in the Muslim community. You might find a man, for example, who will sell alcohol in his shop. So, but this is haram. The hadith is clear. Whoever sells it, whoever drinks it, whoever transports it, we know the hadith. They say to you, yes, but I'm selling to non-Muslims. I don't sell to Muslims, right? So now the technicality comes into it. Subhanallah, right? And worse instances, many worse instances, but people go around the essence of the law is don't harm the people. That's the essence. So you don't have to be told. If you're decent, I don't have to tell you. Yes, but the essence is don't harm people with intoxicants, right? But if you work on the essence on the technicality, but it only says Muslims, then of course now you lost the entire premise. And we need to bring a law to stop you from doing that, either a fatwa or a law to stop you from doing that. That's not the society we want to live in. Everything now is being monitored technically. So
and just another thing that Muslims now nowadays we discuss about Khilafah, about Sharia, and everything, and this is the ideal. This is the idea of Muslims about Khilafah. I mean, they just think about the rules, regulations, and nobody really talks about the essence. So this is going to be this Islam or the law that we're going to bring upon ourselves if we implement Islam anywhere. I mean, nobody really understands the essence of Islam, and majority don't practice it. So what are we bringing on ourselves? We should be very careful when we talk about this. Do we really understand the essence?
and there are many scholars who spoke. And by the way, if your hand is up, you can speak. You don't have to raise your hand. You can just speak. Yeah. This
Assalamu
question.
alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, brother Osman. How are you?
Okay, Alhamdulillah. What I would like to add is now, first of all, I think how we can make a change to the next generation is by us internalizing the deen. Because if you
Exactly.
check, we need to look back on history. If you check, most of the da'wah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not only about speech. It was not more about, do this and that. This is what make this. It was how will I say it, his behavior, he was the perfect appearance of Islam itself. So that's actually what attracted others to Islam. I think we need more of that than academical stuff. We need the academical stuff, but we need to internalize the deen. That's what we need. We have
Wallah.
to be living Islam. We have to be the physical shape of Islam. That's actually what I think.
I agree with you. And again, this is excellent. I mean, this is the essence of it, is that to internalize the message. And as a society, as a people, even individuals, when you act upon the essence of things, that's far more powerful than just talking about technicalities. Technically this, technically that, or demanding that external um, influence or factors be put in place. You demand those external things. It's better for you to have an internal. For example, my son came to me this week and he said to me that in school, he's only 13, in school, they had an assembly and the teacher gave a lecture about anti-Semitism. And in giving that lecture about anti-Semitism, she mentioned October 7th. and how the Jewish people are suffering in Palestine and how Hamas attacked them and blah blah. Right. So when she gave that lecture, one of the young Muslim women, young Muslim girl, sorry, it's only 13, she stood up and she began to use bad language. And then she left the hall. So my son, rather than follow her example, which is a bad example actually, he went to the teacher after the lesson and he said to her, I appreciate what you've taught us, but there are two sides of every story. And if it's possible, I would like to help you craft another message for another day on the other side of the story. Right? She called me that same day. She was so happy. She called me that same day and she said to me, I was so impressed by his reaction and how level headed he was and how respectful he was. He explained it in such a beautiful way. Yes, you gave one side of the story, but give us both sides. And as a Muslim, I'll help you craft that message. Yeah? Now, of these two approaches, one which says, I don't like what you said, I don't like the message, I'm going to protest, I want you to change your attitude, I'm going to put it on you. Or the one that says, actually, I disagree with you, but I can help you. I'm presenting myself as a resource to you. How can I be of service to you? How can I contribute to help you if you misunderstood something? Which of these two approaches works best? I think the second approach. Rather than attacking the problem, say, listen, I don't agree with it, but I'm here as a Muslim. I can help you. I can contribute positively. Right? That's how you change people's perspectives, the interaction, and society at large. But if it's just a matter of complaining, pointing fingers, um, condemning and insulting, you change nothing. In fact, you make things worse. Yeah. So we can complain about the societies we live in. We can complain about the rulership, but essentially speaking, there's something within, as a brother said, rather than talking too much, you embody that change. When Rasulullah entered Medina, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made it very clear, spread peace, feed people, and be good people. This is how you begin making an impact. He wasn't just give lectures all day, every single day, go on debating tours with the Christians, the Jews, the pagans. It wasn't any of that. It was just get in there, be good human beings and ambassadors of Islam, and the message will reach its audience. You embody that rather than just discussing and talking and condemning. Final statements, Brother Anas.
Jay, Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, my phone battery keeps going dying. So
No
one thing I
problem.
want to just add, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly say in Quran Kareem, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ, right? He
Mhm.
used the word ihsan here. We're born as a human being, we cultivate ihsan, you know? And we all, when we die, when we pass away, when we go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, Ya ayyatuha nafsul mutma'inna, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya, fadkhuli fi ibadi wadkhuli jannati. That is our goal, right? How do we obtain it? وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. We do da'wah through ihsan. We born, we embody ihsan. Ihsan is, there are so many like stages of ihsan to a point where we don't even step on a cockroach for no reason. You have to feel bad for killing an ant. You're like, you have to ask yourself a question. Why do I kill? Enough, you know? It's very important for us to be very educated. I agree with you what Ibn Khaldun rahimahullah said that if somebody was like everything is technology, because ihsan is very important. When you do things, even if it's jais, if something is completely sharia is allowing you to do
Mhm.
it, but because it's not right. If we're gonna look at from a taqwa, if we're gonna look from a taqwa point, if we're gonna look from like, for example, getting second wife without telling your husband, I mean, without telling your wife is against a taqwa, it's against ihsan. Yeah, even though you're not doing anything wrong, like I'm just saying, Sharia allow you to do that. For example, marrying someone while having a mut'a intention, for example, that's not something right. Like ihsan, your ihsan is telling you, your heart is telling you, this is something not right.
Mhm.
But you're like, yeah, Sharia is allowed, blah, blah, blah. Because of we are not embodying ihsan in our thing. Like, one of the things me personally will say, I'm in a very religious environment. I make a lots of dua myself when I was in school. Ya Allah, please don't let my children to be like my teacher's son because they're the worst of the worst.
They don't understand. They have no, because their parents are all the time telling them do this, do that, do that, do that, do that, do that. No, there's always force. They were never basically they don't have a basically under they never have the chance to understand adabs and all these ihsan. So my point is, I think we should need balance a little bit. One is we have to rather telling children to go pray because you're going to go to Jahannam. What are we saying?
SubhanAllah.
Oh, my son, pray your zuhur to please your Lord.
SubhanAllah. SubhanAllah.
You know, don't eat haram because the dua between you and your Lord's 40 days, there will be a burial between you and your Lord. Don't say if you die at this night, you are not going to be a. So, like, I have seen it in my own life. Whenever I'm in Tabligh Jamaat, I always talk about rahma, 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 rahma. I'm very careful if I have to talk about like wa'id. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gonna punish you because insan becomes so helpless. We're like, I'm gonna go to Jahannam, let me just do whatever I want to do, right? But if we talk
SubhanAllah.
about rahma, 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 we feel ashamed to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
But here's the thing, some people need to be told about the punishment to behave themselves. Some people cannot behave or cannot abide by the law without the threat of punishment. This is why it begins with Bashir or Nadir. You first give glad tidings. The healthy heart accepts that, and that's sufficient for them. But there are some people who cannot operate on that level. They are operating on different wavelength. They have to be threatened with punishment before they can comply with the law. Yes, unfortunately, that's how it is. For some people, there has to be the alternative, which is if you don't do it properly, if you don't abide by the law, there is a punishment then to come after that. Yeah, but it's about balance, isn't it? You don't want it to be always punishment, 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 punishment. As Ibn Khaldun says, you then break the spirit and morale. In the same way, when the Mujahid gathered the booty, and Sa'ad radiallahu anhu wanted to take it from him to teach him a lesson, Omar said no. If you deal with him that way, you're gonna break his morale, and there's a greater battle at hand. You're gonna lose that battle. Yeah. So this is about hikmah, how to deal with situations. But again, in society, at a societal level, to expect everything to be taken care of, to be put in a position whereby you just turn up and everything is in position. You'd have to strive and struggle and find balance within yourself. Ultimately speaking, it's not helpful. It's not helpful, ultimately speaking. Brother Mus'ab, I think your mic is
Yeah,
on.
Ustad, let's say Ibn Khaldun was saying there's few people in the society who have power, and the majority don't have power. So these few people who have power, how did they get there? They basically overcame their nafs. Then they got to control the others, right? So the way I saw was Ibn Khaldun was getting out to jihadun nafs.
Absolutely. And this is exactly you're right. He began the chapter by saying most human beings cannot master their own affairs. That's the majority of people. But there's a number of people, the minority, who are able to do that. Yeah. And they are the people, as you mentioned, who can control themselves. As the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that the strong man is the one who is able to يملك نفسه عند الغضب, able to
Yeah.
control himself when he's angry. His emotion, he can control it. To control yourself, that is the strength of the sign of real strength. So yes, when you're able to overcome for your own self, it's like when the man came by and he saw, Sayyidina Umar saw the man planting a seed, and this man was an old man. He's planting a date seed in the ground. Mathematically speaking, he's an old man. How long will it take for the seed to become a palm tree, to bear fruit? They says to him, you're an old man and you're planting a seed. Mathematically speaking, it doesn't make sense. So the man says, in the same way, I am eating of the trees that were planted yesterday. I am planting a tree today for those who come tomorrow. Yeah? That's a person who is working for the societal good, not for himself. He understands, yes, I'm doing something for the greater good. Yeah? These are the people who are in position to help create a society that's better, that's worth living in. They're always a minority. And they're the people who can see the greater good. They see the greater good of things and the greater perspective of things, and they're able to guide society in the right way. They're not people who are obsessed with minor details and technicalities. They are people who can see the greater thing and guide society the right way. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you for your time. It's been quite a long one today. Inshallah, we'll post it tomorrow. We can continue the discussion in the group if you feel like discussing further, inshallah. And we're back next Wednesday with the Muqaddimah. We're back on Friday at 9 o'clock with the press review. We will be reviewing the recent events in Syria with the presidential announcements of Ahmed Sharat and also his Hajj and his Umrah. So that'll be discussion in the next session, inshallah, of the press review on Friday. Barakallahu feekum. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Once your work is finished, don't watch the television. Once your work is finished, find something constructive to add to your mind. Have an hour for reading. And I don't mean read comic books. Read something that will make you know what's happening. So when you get into conversation, you can sound intelligent, even if you aren't.